So Mr. Serrano-Sewell should be here momentarily. I think we're going to start now, get started now. And I want, before we formally start, we will, I lost Dr. Gananadev. We will actually, when we convene the board meeting tomorrow, formally, we will acknowledge and ask for a moment of silence to commemorate the unexpected and devastating death of our colleague, Dr. Janet Salmonson, who passed away shortly after returning from a medical mission that she was involved in the late summer, early fall. And we were devastated to learn of her loss. A young woman with enormous capabilities, a giant heart, and someone who has contributed enormously to this board and to her patients. And so I will acknowledge her at the full board meeting, but I really didn't want to start today without also mentioning that even though Janet, her last meeting was July, we will miss her terribly and are very saddened by the loss. So I'm going to now convene the meeting of the Executive Committee of the Medical Board. And I want to ask everyone to please turn off their cell phones or turn them on silent and stun. Make sure they're off the table so we can avoid feedback. And I think everyone here understands that committee members may be using their laptops to access committee materials. I brought mine to the board meeting in paper, and it required a second suitcase. So I think computers are a great advantage to conducting our business. This is an official meeting of the Medical Board of California, and I will try to conduct this committee meeting as effectively and efficiently as possible, and without unwarranted disruptions. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment. We'll ask for public comment on each agenda item. And if I forget to ask, my colleague here will poke me in the ribs, as she has been doing during her, since she joined the board. And we certainly welcome comment on any item on the agenda. We are going, one of our agenda items today is to walk through the strategic planning document that we have revised substantially since it was created in the fall of 2012. And we will be taking comment both from board members as well as from members of the public after each objective. And so it'll take us a bit of time to get through it, but it's long enough and expansive enough for us for me not to feel it's not fair to ask people to remember everything they wanted to say. We will ask speakers to stay on topic and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And I'm going to call the meeting to order now and ask Ms. Tuve to please call the roll.
Dr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Serrano-Sewell?
He's here.
He's here. Dr. Diego?
Hey.
Dr. Gananadev?
Here.
And Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Present.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. I have one speaker slip for items not on the agenda, and would ask if anyone else would like to make a comment on something not on the agenda to please get a slip from Ms. Toof and fill it out. Karen Ehrlich.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I am Karen Ehrlich. I am the vice chair currently of the Midwifery Advisory Council. I first of all want to say that we are, by far most of us in the state of California, are thrilled with the passage of AB 1308, and I appreciate any help that any of you might have offered as it went through the legislative process. It came to my attention maybe a couple of months ago that somewhere during this year, as that bill was in process, there was one time where the executive committee discussed some of the provisions in that bill Unfortunately, there was no licensed midwife in the room during that discussion. And I think that if there had been a licensed midwife present, you would have had a much more thorough conversation about it. There would have been much more accurate detail. It would have been, I think, a really smart thing. It would have made sense for that discussion to have taken place with a midwife present. I would like to ask that you do everything you can to make sure that there is a licensed midwife in the room to be able to fill in the gaps for you when you are talking about any of our issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ehrlich. Anyone else wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? Okay. We'll move to agenda item 3, approval of the minutes from the January 31st, 2013 Executive Committee meeting. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Are there any additions, corrections, or comments on the minutes of the meeting? And I will ask that if board members, as you go through the minutes, if there are typos or language errors that are not substantive, that you just note them and then give them to Kim so that we don't actually spend time at our committee meeting or our board meeting correcting typos. And I have a whole bunch, which I'll give to Kim at the end of the meeting. So hearing nothing, no substantive questions, I'd like to ask for any public comment on the minutes of the January 31st Executive Committee meetings. If seeing none, hearing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes are accepted. As most of you know, we adopted the board's strategic plan in early 2012, the same year we completed our Sunset Review report. And since the completion of that report and on reflection on how that plan was put together and the process we went through, as well as the findings and responses of the Senate and Assembly committees, we felt that we needed to review the strategic plan and make certain that it's in line with what members feel are the current important goals and objectives of the board and where we, as board members and where staff, ought to be spending their time. It's very important that the plan truly capture what the board's intent is and communicate to all of our stakeholders and constituents where the board resources will be used. Given that every one of us in the private and public sectors operate in an environment of, we don't operate in an environment of unlimited resources. And we also made the determination after working with our colleague in the DCA, who's going to be making a presentation to the committee, that the strategic plan should not capture items that are within the standard or normal business processes of the board, that the plan needed to be somewhat at a higher level and not capture routine business activities or business processes. I met with Kim to discuss a proposal to review the plan, and then Mr. Phil Tagami offered to join me as a two-person committee to revise the plan and to bring forward revisions to the committee. We constituted ourselves as an operational effectiveness committee and sought consultation from Mr. Tom Roy, who's here with us today, from the Department of Consumer Affairs. And he's going to lead us through the process. Mr. Roy has been working in strategic planning with the Department of Consumer Affairs since 2010 and has facilitated successful planning and implementation of over 20 strategic plans for a variety of boards, bureaus, and programs within state government. And we've asked him today to walk through the revisions and to lead us through the thinking and the process behind the creation of a strategic plan, one that accurately reflects the goals and objectives of this board. Mr. Roy.
All right. Hopefully I'm live. I can't really tell. Okay. Thank you, Medical Board, for inviting me here.
Can you all hear him?
all. We understand the concept.
Hold on a second.
There's a little button there.
It says power on. This one? On now? It's green. Okay, am I louder? All right, I can project a little bit more. Hello, Medical Board of California. Thank you for inviting me down here today. Thanks again for the introduction. That saved me a little bit of time. What I'd like to do is start basically by describing how I envision us getting through today. Firstly, as she said, I have done many strategic plans, and one of the elements that we always deal with strategic plans is kind of getting into the discussion of specific words. My role today is to capture as much of the documentation as possible. I'm going to walk through the timeline of going through the proposed objectives that came out of the discussion with Dr. Levine and Mr. Tagami. For the purposes of this presentation, I've only included the clean version of the objectives. If you have your board packet and you want to look through the strike-through to find out what was removed, we can do that, and I can pull it up on a separate document if necessary. But my goal is a neutral participant. I'm just here to help facilitate the meeting and capture the content and document the discussion. Here's a little roadmap. And part of the facilitation I envision, I'm going to sit down and type to try to capture everything. But as Dr. Levine mentioned, I met with Kim initially to discuss what the medical board needed. And then we met with the Operational Effectiveness Committee, to discuss augmentations to the strategic plan, as well as we reviewed some staff suggestions and edits. Today in the planning session, and normally when we do a strategic planning session, it can be a little longer, so this is going to be, am I in frame? Okay. We're just going to be reviewing those goals and action statements, and as Dr. Levine said, we'll take an opportunity to discuss if there are any missing areas that we need to potentially add or modify. And following each objective area, what I'd like to do is I'd like to assign it a priority. It's very important in strategic planning to determine which of the objectives need to be accomplished first, given there are limited resources and sometimes limited time. Following that, after we complete that at the end of today's session, I'm going to talk about next steps, which is going to be involving working with staff to determine those specific actions that accomplish the overall objective. And following that, we'll have a compiled plan, which we'll deliver to the board at the February 2014 board meeting. So really quickly, we're just going to go through the proposed revisions. We're going to look at the goal statements, which each goal has an action statement behind it. Some of them were modified during the course of our teleconference. If there are any changes that we'd like to suggest for those, we can do so at that time. And then we're going to go through and look at those objectives. Okay, so the strategic plan is made up, obviously, of the mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. The goals, as were previously established, are the same. The action statements behind them are as follows. The modifications to professional qualifications are to promote the professional qualifications of medical practitioners by setting requirements for licensure and relicensure, including education, experience, and demonstrated competence. The action statement for regulations and enforcement was proposed to protect the public by effectively enforcing laws and standards, and consumer and licensee education to increase public and licensee awareness of the board, its mission, activities, and services.
Okay.
At this point, I just wanted to find out from the board members present if they have any thoughts or feelings or changes to suggest on any of these action statements. Otherwise, I will proceed.
And as Tom said, this is just the headline, and then following from this will be objectives and action plans.
Correct.
That will be brought back to the board. But this is just what we're approving today is the framework. Ms. Yaroslavsky?
So I just want to be clear on what our responsibilities are. So we're going to be taking a look at just the broad concepts and approving the broad concepts and nothing underneath at all?
No, we're looking at the broad, oh, sorry.
So I read all this for no reason?
No, no.
We're starting at the broad concepts, then we're getting into the objectives.
And then we're
Well,
getting into the objectives.
Okay, so when we get to the objectives, then I'm good.
Okay. Any comments from board members on this? Any comments from members of the public on this? Okay.
I'm going to follow to the remaining 3 goal areas, and then we'll get into the objectives. Organizational relationships, build relationships with related organizations to further the board's missions and goals, organizational effectiveness, evaluate and enhance organizational effectiveness and systems to improve service, and lastly, this is quite the mouthful, access to care, workforce, and public health, understanding the implications of healthcare reform and evaluating how it may impact access to care and issues surrounding healthcare delivery, as well as promoting public health as appropriate to the board's mission in exercising its licensing, disciplinary, and regulatory functions. That sounds like, all right. So now we're going to get into the actual objectives, unless
Any
you,
questions about these three? In many ways, these six really are carried forward from the last strategic plan. There isn't much here that's new. What we've done is tried to clean up the language and state them in six coherent goals that fit with the board's mission and purpose. Any
Okay.
questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, Tom, take it away.
Okay. Now we're getting into the real meat of today's meeting, which is the objective areas. Now from this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to review the proposed changes, discuss any language modifications that we need to, and then address any areas that there might be lacking. We may have missed something, and a new objective might need to be proposed. Following that, after public comment, hopefully, I'd like to assess a priority of the objective. I'd like to do it by a number scale, one to be the one accomplished first, but if that becomes too difficult, we can do a high, medium, and low strategy. But I think, given that there are 4 of us, that we can determine one, we can use the number scale. Okay, so this is under the professional qualifications. We already discussed the action statement. So these are the two. For this one, there's
Tom, before you go on,
Sure.
I think it's actually more useful to think of this as a 2x2 matrix. Importance and temporal sequencing are really two different things. There may be things that are very important, but because of the timing required, but for example, the issue of maintenance of licensure, it may be very important, but we're ways away from being able to evaluate the pilot,
Okay.
the FSMB pilot. So I think it might be more useful to just have a 2x2 matrix, both.
This is a new system that we tried on one of our prior boards. We did high, medium, and low first, and then we went back and did a priority numerically.
Okay.
So we can start with a high, medium, low, and then just organically high priority items tend to be 1, 2, and 3, medium, and low.
Okay.
But going into this, and this is where I'm going to probably go into a sitting position to try to capture everything, but this is 1.1 as it was proposed and modified. And some of these were combined into one objective versus just to encapsulate all of the ideas of several objectives into one objective. So 1.1 is examine the Federation of State Medical Boards maintenance of licensure and American Board of Medical Specialties maintenance of licensure initiatives to determine if changes are needed to existing requirements, continuing medical education in order to ensure maintenance of competency of California physicians. Would it be helpful for me to read this or just discuss each item as a group?
We already read it, I hope.
You've already read it. What's the
My
question?
question is, I think that we've read it, or hopefully we've read it, and if we haven't, we should be able to catch up real quick. It's not
Okay.
too deep, or it's
What I'd
not
like
too
to
many
do
words.
is I'll.
But unless you like reading out loud, I mean, I can sit here and listen.
Why don't you go through
There are a lot of technical language.
Yeah, there is. If you go through the objectives for each of the goals as a body, and then we can take questions on those. So,
Okay, so for objectives 1.1 and 1.2, before we determine if there are additional ones that need to be added, I'd like to discuss these and find out if the board is okay with approving these as is.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
So I'm going to suggest that in reading all of this with the corrections, I read it, I didn't read the red line first, I read the other line first. And my question is, and it will be on all of them, I think, as to what is it trying to change? Has there been something that's been a barrier or a weakness in the system that needs to be beefed up? Or in fact, are there ways that we could, so I'm not so sure what we're doing, in the level of intensity or importance, what we're discussing for why. So for example, on this first one, if you go back to professional, promote the professional qualifications of medical practitioners by setting requirements for licensure, relicensure, blah, 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 are those rules of the game going to be changed based on what you have underneath? Or is it going to add stuff to it? And why, I'm not clear on, it sounds like we're writing them from scratch and we're reinventing the wheel. So my concern is that within the process, that if there is a weakness or barrier to what we've been doing, I think that needs to be identified and pulled out.
So, to be specific on this one, the current requirements for licensure in the state and the requirements for relicensure, this is raising the question of, that has been raised by others as to whether additional requirements beyond traditional continuing medical education, in California it's 50 hours every 2 years, is still sufficient
Right.
to ensure maintenance of competency of California physicians. This isn't providing the answer that says,
Right, but is your question, what you've just raised now, encapsulated in that verbiage? It really is.
yeah, examine the processes that FSMB is undergoing, ABMS has already been doing for a long time, to see if changes are needed to, maybe for clarity it should say, to existing requirements in California.
Right, see, my concern is that if FSMB is going to be the benchmark, or is the Medical Board of California going to set the standard? And I just thought that there wasn't the clarity that I wanted to see in this. And that might be just me, the layperson, you doctors know what you need to do anyway. But if I were to be the consumer taking a look at this, I'm wondering, well, what have they been doing up until now? Haven't they been doing this? Or are they looking to increase the requirements, and those requirements are from FSMB? And I wasn't clear.
So I think perhaps it would be clear if we added the words to existing requirements in California,
Okay.
which currently are CME.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's basically what it says is that we are looking at two organizations to see what their guidelines are and look at ours and see if we need to do anything to improve. That's all I'm getting out of this, because, right, there is, if you look at the ABIM went to the maintenance of certification. So it's not just taking the exam every 7 to 10 years anymore. You have to be doing specific CMEs where it's not just sitting through a meeting, but also you have to answer the questions and you have to have higher than 75% correct answers, so that then only those things apply. So these are the.
So I think the clarification in California helps me a lot.
And if we go back, and the goal, the larger goal, also included licensure. This objective doesn't actually stipulate that, and I suspect that's for a future time. But this is the objective number one is about maintenance of competence, which currently in California is 50 hours of CME every 2 years. There are some states in which CME is explicitly prohibited except in disciplinary actions, which is why those states have actually started looking for something other than CME to demonstrate competence. Colorado is one of those states.
Dr. Levine, you proposed some language, and I wanted to make sure I captured it.
To existing requirements in California. Yeah. In order to ensure maintenance of competency of California physicians. That's great, Tom. Thanks.
That's much more clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 1.2. Define what is necessary to promote safe re-entry into medical practice after extended absences, including looking at the difference between the licensure requirement of re-entry, 5 years, and the disciplinary re-entry, 18 months.
Yeah, and there's some words missing from this one, too.
Okay.
So it should read, define what is necessary to demonstrate competency and promote safe re-entry into medical practice after extended absences, including looking at the current difference between the requirement for retraining, for reentry, right? And this is so elided that it kind of loses it. It's kind of shorthand. So currently there is a difference between the requirement for relicensure after 5 years of non-practice. If you've let your license lapse for 5 years, you have to do some proactive training to get a license. Under the disciplinary guidelines, you have to demonstrate competency after 18 months of non-practice. So there's a discrepancy within our current practice and our regulations that needs harmonization. And so this is only to say, if there's a standard for a time certain at which point a physician for consumer protection needs to demonstrate competency through a retraining, through some retraining or proctoring, it ought to be the same whether the non-practice was due to lapse in license without discipline and lapse in practice without discipline, and lapse in practice with discipline. And
Should this also include at all any kind of collaboration with existing programs in teaching hospitals across the state?
Sure.
On a regular basis, so that just as you've put in on the first one, FSMB and ABMS, should we also be looking to a bit more of a collaborative every 2 years, every 3 years, every specific amount of time, that teaching hospitals across the state of California are engaged with with the Medical Board of California to share best practices or
so once we've defined what we think it ought to be,
right.
the
Down below, okay,
tactic
okay.
underneath that would be
Okay.
to develop a common approach with the training institutions
Right,
in
okay,
the
so I'll
state.
put a hold on that, because that's what I put for up there,
Yeah.
okay.
And we're not going to get to the tactic level today. We're
No,
going to
no,
come
okay,
back with
okay.
that, but
All right, so for goal number 1, professional qualifications, these are the 2 objectives that were proposed. Would the board like to discuss any further objectives to this? And do we want to allow for public comment before assigning priority?
any further board comments?
Well, the 1.2 has been an issue since my presence on the medical board, because we go through some disciplinary proceedings and we do not really know how to make sure that these people are competent. PACE program and just education program alone doesn't cut it, so that's why we're trying to look at different venues. How can we 3 months, 6 months of additional training somewhere? I think these are the ones we need to seriously look at to see how we can get that person to up to par.
And those programs are currently very difficult to find.
That's correct.
But if we create a market for them, generally the market will respond. Comments from members of the public on the 2 objectives under goal number 1. Okay, great, thanks. Tom?
Okay, at this point, I'd like to assign a priority level to each of these objectives. So if one of the board members would like to present a potential priority for objective 1.1, obviously the general
1.1 for me would be under 1.2. I would put 1.2 above 1.1, but I don't know what, you're going to blend it both together, right?
Yeah.
So I don't understand. So this would be a high priority. Wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you say?
No, yeah, I mean, to me, these are all high priority, actually, so.
I don't know how we're going to
that's
do that.
generally what ends up happening. That's where the number
Right.
system kind of comes in.
So, perhaps it might be helpful to try and do this when we've gone through it, but
Okay, we can do it at the end if you'd like.
if we could come back to these after we've had a chance to see them in context with the whole package.
No problem. All right, moving on to the second goal area, regulations and enforcement. 2.1, study disciplinary and administrative cases, including looking at physicians in training to identify trends or issues that may signal dangerous practices or risks.
And the idea behind this is that the BREEZE project is pretty much nearing completion of its initial implementation, and it should give us the ability to mine the data, which the medical board has around potentially those things that might predict early someone who is at risk for future disciplinary action. And until we're able to look at our collective experience, it's been very difficult to try and do that. It's really been a paper-based chase. And so our hope is that we will have a much better and much higher utility ability to look at things that potentially might signal an opportunity for early intervention, either at the medical school level, residency level, or in practice.
This is like the actuarial information insurance companies gather to figure out how they should, is that similar that we'd be able to do?
It's really not actuarial, which has to do with economic value.
Well, but
It's more about manipulation of
the
data.
end result is the same, kind of. Not? They have indicated, they're indicators within, from my understanding, within that field, the ability to do exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, so to the extent that actuaries do predictive modeling,
Right, that's
this would be a look back at, for example, are women over the age of 40 more likely to get in trouble with X at a statistically and meaningfully significant higher frequency than somebody else, some other demographic.
But would it also give us the ability to take, let's say, the last 5 years of disciplinary cases and take a look at what the outcomes and maybe what might have been the predictors at?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I'm. Okay.
Absolutely. Or are there things, when an individual is disciplined by the medical board, are there things within the case that predicts that a certain subset of these licensees are more likely to have a second episode that brings them before the board?
Right.
As the language stands, does the board agree? We move on to 2.2?
I'm okay with it. You okay? You okay? I'm okay. You're okay?
All right, 2.2, examine the expert reviewer program and policy to determine how it may be improved, including recruitment, evaluation of experts, opportunities for education, and policies governing the board's use of experts. Fairly straightforward.
And this is a continuation of work that's already been begun, and it's in here because clearly it can continue to be improved.
Okay, excellent. 2.3, partner with the Office of Administrative Hearings and Health Quality Enforcement section of the Attorney General's Office to identify opportunities and design curriculum for the ongoing education of judges.
2.2.
Any questions?
That's okay. All right. Would you like me to stop to allow for public comment?
We'll do it at the end of this section.
All right. 2.4, review the laws and regulations pertaining to the board's responsibility to regulate outpatient surgery centers and, if necessary, suggest amendments.
Yeah, it's fine.
Should there be some kind of expectation here of some minimum
Frequency?
minimum frequency, minimum standards, comparisons, regulations? I mean, should this?
Well, again, we can put that
If
under
nec-
you know, we can, with this will drive an operating plan in which will be embedded the frequency and how often and.
But if necessary, is that?
Well, Mr. Serrano-Sewell just asked if necessary. So since we're probably going to do this on a regular basis,
Yeah, I'd
I'm
take
hearing
out
a
if-
suggestion we take
take it out,
if
yeah.
necessary out.
Yeah. It's
And
always
suggest
necessary.
It's
isn't it?
always necessary. Okay.
All right. Moving on to 2.5, determine whether the board's registered dispensing optician program should remain within the authority of the board.
I don't want to be too difficult, but your numbers are different than my numbers, is that?
It's 2.9, I believe, unless you change.
Based on the edits of the document, objectives were removed, so
Okay.
I've just decided to put them in the numerical order that they would exist
Oh,
when the
okay.
documents
Yeah,
amended.
because
Okay.
we got totally different.
So any thoughts on 2.5?
Any need for clarification on this? Well, it'll become apparent during the board meeting why this is in here.
Okay. Moving on to 2.6, which is the final objective proposed for this goal, identify methods of ensuring the board is receiving the required reports pursuant to Business and Profession Code, Section 805.
Okay. Any comments or clarifying questions from the board members? If not, comments from members of the public on Ms. D'Angelo Felmuth.
Good afternoon, Dr. Levine and board members. Julie D'Angelo Felmuth from the Center for Public Interest Law. I just have two quick comments. One possible addition. Inasmuch as your investigators are going to be transferred to the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation next year, I would think you might want to add, similar to 2.3, partnering with OAH and HQE, partner with DCA's Division of Investigation to make sure that you are getting the information you need about backlogs, about timeframes, about all kinds of stuff. This is uncharted territory for this board going back to the mid-'70s when the investigators first came to the Med Board from the Division of Investigation. Also, on the last one, which has been renumbered to 2.6 regarding 805 reporting, I think you need to look not only at reports received pursuant to 805, but also 801.01 from insurance companies, reports of arbitration awards. I've been looking into a case in San Diego where a physician has slimed out of reporting multiple settlements, arbitration awards. I don't know how he's doing this. And I'll explain it better later, but I would
Was that verb slimed?
It's a new word,
The word was
isn't
slimed.
It's in the dictionary this year.
All right.
I think the board should take a look at all of its mandatory reporting requirements and figure out whether they are being adhered to. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Did you capture that?
I did.
Great.
Would we like to amend 2.6?
Any objections from our, great. Let's just accept that.
Okay.
I'm just curious, what are those reports? 801 reports, what is it?
801.1.
Oh, 0.01,
Yeah, I'm just,
insurance.
We could go with the language.
No,
This language is very specific to BNP.
no, I know 805 reports, I'm just trying to find out what exactly is 801.1 report is.
801.01 are malpractice settlements. So those that we receive when an individual has a case that settles via malpractice and they're over the $30,000 limit.
Oh, I
Well,
thought we already
there's several
said.
different ones. 801.01 is
Right.
a report of settlement of arbitration award.
It's arbitration insurance awards.
801 is
And
insurance
judgments as well.
reports.
Yeah,
That is the current law, I understand, is that correct? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I think what Ms. Falmouth is recommending is that we not only look at the 805 reports, 805 has been one of the big drivers because of the hospital peer review reporting and the decline in the cases that we've received, but she's recommending that we look at basically, I think, all mandatory reporting and see if we're receiving them. It's hard to know what you don't know, so, but we'll look at how we would do that.
Thank you. And this is really about looking, as it says, it's the methods of how do we ensure we're getting what we're
Right.
supposed to get as opposed to
Outreach,
reviewing
education.
what we got.
Right.
Yeah.
Would the board mind if I change the language of this objective to identify methods of ensuring the board is receiving all the required reports necessary? Or
All
necessary
mandated reports.
Mandated?
Right.
Is it already mandated within a certain business and professions code that we should list that instead, or no? No?
We can list that under the specifics, but
Okay.
this is just to encompass the universe of
Okay.
people that are supposed to be sending us reports, and it would include certainly the outpatient surgery stuff
Oh, yeah.
when we get to that.
And then regarding the other comment, do you want me to draft an objective about partnering with DCA's Division of Investigation?
I think you could just add the DCA, where it says OAH, comma, HQES,
Comma,
comma, and
DCA.
DCA
to identify 'em.
DOI?
I think, I don't want to put words in Ms. Felma's mouth, but I think what she's more talking about is there's nothing in here, and I believe I've talked to some of the other members about this, and that there's nothing in our requirements right now or in our objectives to move forward in measuring the transition of our investigators to the Department of Consumer Affairs. And so I think that is a great recommendation to add one like that in. I think Mr. Serrano was going to bring that up at the end anyway. So I think we do need to write one that talks about some type of reporting requirement from the Department of Consumer Affairs to monitor the transition and the timelines that occur once they go over. So I'm not sure the exact wording, but I think that that's where we need to go with that. I mean,
So are
we
you
have
recommending a separate one, or are you
Yeah.
recommending it
separate.
Separate
Yeah.
one.
I mean, we have every intention of doing that, but to put it in our strategic plan is probably a great idea.
And it's high priority and immediate.
Exactly.
So do you want to add it in as a separate number is what I'm asking? And would you put it in it after the one that goes to OH, or would you add it at the bottom? I mean, just, it
You
needs to be
can
added.
put it in anywhere, it's just,
Needs to be
we need to
added.
give it the priority that it needs, I think, at this point.
Absolutely.
And it could go under, actually,
Maybe
this
4,
goal or a
2.
different goal, yeah. It could be under organizational
Right,
relationships.
organizational effectiveness even, it could go into there, because you're still measuring your investigation, it's just being done by a different unit.
And there are
So-
two pieces, I think as you said, there are two pieces. One is that the goal of, or the objective of working with DCA to ensure smooth transition of the people and the work to Department of Investigations, and then to work with DCA to ensure we get the stuff we're supposed to get.
You might want to put the two together, because I know one thing that Tom keeps hammering me about is they have to be measurable. So it's kind of hard to measure the smoothness of it, except for by measuring the effectiveness of it. So you might want to just, that's kind of the way you'll know that it's happening smoothly, is if your timeframes go down or stay the same.
The effectiveness of the move, right.
Right,
I was talking about the effectiveness of the transition. Putting an objective, something in there about ensuring that the people, that the transition of people to DCA is done in a way that enables them to do their work and
Right.
enables us, so there's no slippage on the work
Right,
during
right.
But you have to have measurable outcomes to determine that.
Right.
Yeah, that's what, I think that, maybe we can kick that around afterwards with Tom as to how we would measure that. And then if we find that we're having a hard time being able to measure that, we can bring that back when we come back with the next meeting, so.
Okay.
All right, I'm just going to grab this and capture it, and we can polish it out later if that's all right.
Terrific.
All right, moving on from Goal 2 into Goal 3. Consumer and licensee education. This one has a lot of objectives proposed. Starting with 3.1, expand all outreach efforts to educate physicians, medical students, and the public regarding the board's laws, regulations, and responsibilities. Everyone all right with that? Excellent. Okay. 3.2, establish a proactive approach in communicating via the media and other various publications to inform and educate the public, including California's ethnic communities, regarding the board's role in protecting consumers through its programs and disciplinary actions. All right. Moving on to 3.3, examine opportunities for the board to provide training to licensees via the internet, including hosting webinars on subjects of importance to public protection and public health. .4, establish a method for hosting public seminars taught by legal or enforcement personnel on disciplinary cases, laws violated, and other issues of importance to the profession and the public. And lastly, 3.5, review the board's public disclosure laws regarding posting postgraduate information and the 10-year retention of disciplinary information/documents. Any thoughts or suggestions on any of these objectives?
Should these be listed in order of importance, or it's irrelevant? Or should you put, within goal 3, we have 5 different objectives. Are they all equal weight, or should they,
We can reorder them once we go back and
okay.
vote on their importance. It's a good suggestion.
All right, that is all of the proposed objectives for,
Public comment.
Public comment on the objectives under goal number 3. Hearing,
okay,
seeing none.
that one was quick. All right, goal 4, organizational relationships. 4.1, build relationships with elected officials and their staffs. Build and strengthen collaborative relationships to work toward shared interests in consumer protection and advancing the profession.
I think we can probably compress the language there. It's a bit redundant. Build collaborative relationships with elected officials and their staffs to work toward shared interest in consumer protection and advancing the profession. Got that?
Okay, start from the beginning. What do you got?
Okay. Build collaborative relationships with elected officials and their staffs to work toward shared interests in consumer protection and advancing the profession.
Sounds good.
So you're just taking out build
Yeah.
and strengthen collaborative relationships. It's repetitive.
That's it.
All right. That's spelled wrong. Okay. All right, 4.2, it's okay to proceed. Optimize relationships with the accreditation agencies, associations representing hospitals and medical groups, professional associations and societies, the Federation of State Medical Boards, federal government agencies, and other state agencies, including the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. That's a lot of agencies.
Who could argue with that?
All right. 4.3, improve education, outreach to hospitals, health systems, and similar organizations about the board and its programs.
Okay.
Agree with that one. All right, those are the 3 proposed objectives for 4.3.
Any comments or questions from board members, from members of the public? Ms.
Just a
Ehrlich.
typo. Improve education's outreach.
Ah.
Either should have an apostrophe between N and S or no S.
It should be educational.
It should be
Yeah.
educational.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Better. My apologies.
It's correct on the paper.
Yeah, it was me.
Okay.
All right. Flying right through these. Goal 5, organizational
Hold on.
effectiveness. Oh, sorry.
So sorry. Under Goal 4, organizational relationships, under 4.2, why not include consumer groups as well, those representing the general public interest? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Julie D'Angelo Fellman.
Thank you.
One other typo, there should not be an apostrophe on its. ITS, no apostrophe.
You're right. Another English major in the room.
I don't have it's on my paper.
And in
This is my hand scribing to this PowerPoint slide.
could you add in 4.2 consumer organizations,
At the end or the beginning?
somewhere in the middle?
Okay, perfect.
Would stakeholders replace all of those entities? Appropriate stakeholders, or no, you want to list them out?
It's harder to measure that. This definitely has a lot of categories that are measurable.
Okay.
So maybe we could work on categories rather than naming specifics,
Yeah,
work on
exactly.
some language that encompasses consumers, regulators, legislators, professional associations.
Public entities,
Affiliated
professional
professional
organizations.
associations, allied health professions,
Right.
et cetera. We'll work on that.
All right, I'll modify the language here in a second. All right, moving on to goal 5, if it's okay. 5.1, licensing applications to be reviewed within 45 days. Everyone okay with that? Straightforward.
Yeah, we're doing it already.
5.2, reduce discipline, complaint processing, and investigation timelines by 10 to 20%. Reduce complaint processing average to less than 70 days, with 50 to 60% less than 50 days.
Any comments from board members about the numbers?
It's somehow, this bothered me when I was reading it, because it's not based against anything. So it's not to improve from what we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago or last week, because we have been steadily improving. I've been noticing personally when I've been reading cases that there has been an improvement in the timelines. So to say overall, investigations timeline by 10 to 20%, it's almost unfair, because if you get that one case that's going to take 5 years because there's multiple agencies and entities involved in it, it's going to bring your numbers, it's going to skew your numbering system. So I understand what the purpose of this is, but somehow I was feeling uncomfortable with the numbers, with the days. We have to do things better, I understand that, but compared to what? It's like that pain chart from 1 to 10. 10 means nothing unless you know what 10 means to yourself. That guy on the wall doesn't mean anything to anybody. So I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to tell you that this one bothered me when I was reading it.
So 10 to 20% would be compared to current.
Well, does that mean
Compared-
every year you're going to do 10 to 20%, so at the end of 10 years you're going to be 100% improved? I mean,
Well,
we're
maybe.
talking about numbers. It's a numbers game
Right.
here.
So a 10 to 20% improvement over current, I assume that's what that means.
Does that mean all cases? It means cases that are simple cases, cases that are
These are
dismissed
all
within
on-
20 days?
On average.
On average.
These are,
So Kim, help me
averages.
out here, because I was bothered by this.
I agree with you, and I'm getting that everybody is agreeing with you. It doesn't make sense because there isn't any starting point. So I think we do need to identify a starting point or word it differently, because you're right. Are we talking about from the prior fiscal year? Are we talking about from 2010? Are we talking about?
Maybe
I'm
before we just
with you.
did just
So
split it all.
I don't
So
know if we
is-
want to say from the prior fiscal year, but then when do you get, how low do you go? I guess that's the question, so.
so it doesn't seem to me to have an unreasonable to set a goal of a yearly 10% improvement
Improvement?
in performance over prior year. But you're right, we do need to know where we're starting.
Right,
I absolutely
right.
agree.
It doesn't make sense, so.
And
from the
it also
prior
can't be
fiscal
across
year.
the board. It has to be within,
Well, 10% improvement overall would be.
Overall of them in that year. And usually those outliers, for the most part, and I'm looking to Renee, I think for the most part, those outliers fall out anyway, because you have outliers on both sides. So your average is usually, or median is really what we should be looking at, so.
okay, if you can figure out a way to make it sound like it's,
And so we'll look
Not
at maybe
just-
the median and
it's
for
just
the
that-
prior fiscal year.
because it's,
and then
otherwise it's
come
number
on, I can
crunching
work.
with no value.
Yep.
And that's my concern.
And so you want to change average to median in all of those, Kim?
If that makes it, if that says what I want it to say, I agree along with that. My problem is that the way we measure it currently is we measure everything in one bucket. And if you're gonna reduce by 10%,
Median enables you to actually
Bucket out.
cancel out the
Yes.
outliers,
extreme
and the-
outliers.
and the-
Right.
on either side, okay, then median
Yeah.
is fine.
Median is probably what we're looking at. Okay, so we'll work on that language.
All right. 5 point.
So, what are we leaving it? I'm still trying to see what, other than median, what other change did we make?
Believe the language exists
I think we're gonna add in, from the prior fiscal year, so you're gonna reduce discipline, complaint processing, and investigation times by 10% from the prior fiscal year, something like that. And then add in, obviously, median in there.
Okay.
Okay.
That's achievable goal, let me
Right.
put it that way.
Right.
And how does that impact, though, with the moving of the investigators to Department of Consumer Affairs? Do we have any?
It shouldn't mean anything. I mean, your goal is to improve your timelines, whether they're here or there.
Okay.
And if it looks like we undershot, we can change it next year
Right.
Yeah. We're paying for
and
it.
make it more aggressive.
There-
While the strategic plan doesn't have to be redone every year, the goals can be revisited every year and changed.
Yeah, I'm looking at, even though the investigators are moving to the DCA, we are paying for their services. We expect what we expect, so.
Yeah.
All right, 5.3, conduct a review every 2 years of each of the committees established by the board to determine if they are still needed, if they are fulfilling the purpose for which they were established, and determine if they should continue, be reconfigured, or eliminated. Pretty succinct.
And I think this reflected recommendations from many, if not most, board members.
Excellent. 5.4, establish a consistent approach to educating staff about the board's activities and priorities set by board members, but not limited to facilitating staff attendance at meetings.
And board member attendance at staff meetings.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to add that?
Yeah,
Yeah, and, yeah,
reciprocal.
or in reverse.
All right.
Can you add including before, but not limited to? You should have it.
What? No, sir. All right. 5.5, establish a method for obtaining feedback from users about board services. From users about board services.
Stakeholders, I mean, do you like the word users? If someone's using their user, I don't know.
Yeah.
It bothered me.
Who are they?
Well, we have lots of stakeholders who don't use the services, so we would,
So how about
This is-
another, I don't know, the word users is appropriate?
Licensees and applicants.
me.
No, because the public uses it as well.
from those who access the board services. How's that?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Those who access board services.
That's fine, that's good.
And that would include medical schools, training
Absolutely, everything,
programs.
yeah. Users.
All right, those are the 5 proposed objectives for Goal 5. Is there any additional areas that the board would like to highlight or identify before turning it over to public?
Any comments from members of the public? Our resident grammarian.
About spelling, isn't it?
How much do you want me to do this?
Not that much.
How about
This
if
is
it's,
a work in progress.
if it's grammar offline with Tom?
Preferably.
This is punctuation. Same thing.
Similar.
Offline,
Better.
offline.
So you want me to or not?
No.
Just tell Tom.
Tell Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. This isn't the final draft. This is purely the
Work in
language.
progress.
All right. Any additional comments before moving on to the final goal? Okay. And lastly, Goal 6, access to care, workforce, and public health. The proposed objective 6.1, educate the board on the Affordable Care Act and how it will impact physician practice, workforce, and utilization of allied healthcare professionals.
You like that goal?
I like that goal. Was that a
Okay.
question?
Yes, that was a question, that was an answer.
Any comments, any additions or? And the reason for putting this in here was, I don't mean to be facetious, is that it's pretty clear that as we implement the Affordable Care Act, both in California and nationally, it's going to have huge implications for physician workforce, the allied health professionals, and the relationships between physicians and allied health professionals. And so I think continuing to get reports to the board on what's happening in California as a consequence of this, I think is going to be really important.
All right. Is there any additional board objectives that we'd like to discuss, possibly adding to this goal? Or any?
Any comments from members of the public on this? If not, thank you very much, Tom.
No problem. Now we get to go back to round 2, which is assigning
Oh, right.
priority levels.
We're not done.
45 minutes.
Okay.
All right. For the 2 proposed objectives for goal 1, they sounded both high priority. So if it's okay, I can include high priority on both of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
so.
Now, it was proposed to do a 2x2 matrix. Do you want me to also assign a number? If one had to be achieved.
Neither, yes, so neither, these are both high priority, but neither of them are 2014 issues. So I would put them as a 2, if you will, in terms of,
They're not immediate, right?
Well, one, obviously, with each goal area, one would supersede. You'd start with one, and if it could be accomplished first, it would be accomplished first. If it
oh,
doesn't have to be.
I see. You want to oh, okay, sorry.
And I believe my understanding is that the strategic plan for medical board lasts 4 years. Is it a 4-year plan? So to be accomplished in the next 4 years.
Though most strategic plans don't last that long. So I think objective 1.2 actually is more immediate. I think we need more,
Absolutely.
more
I think, yes,
immediately.
that's why, yeah, we need to at least put them in order of priority within the section, I think. So within the goal number 1, is 1.1 more important or the same as 1.2? And if 1.2 is more important than 1.1, at least we need to elevate it in the
Sequence.
in the way it's written.
And this will change if this is how if 1.2 is more important than 1.1 or could be accomplished first, I would change it to 1.1.
It's more immediate.
More immediate. So it would become 1.1, and then
And
1.1 would be 1.2.
I just wanted to point out that the second one is one of the ones that came from the Sunset Review, so it does have.
Oh, good, okay.
We do
So
have to look at it.
Okay. So moving on to goal 2, there are 6 objectives. So from the 2 pages of these objectives, we can just look at assigning a priority for the first 3 objectives.
There's actually 7. Isn't there 7 now?
Are there 7 now? Did you add a 7?
The 7th, haven't filled the language in yet, but that would be with DCA. I can write a rough objective you'd like, just so we can assign a priority.
So I think the 7th is actually the first.
So let me ask you a question before you do that. Could it go in a different place and be at a higher level then? If you were to put it within organizational relationships, or you were to put it in organizational effectiveness, the DCA, and then if you move it to one of those other places, then you have an opportunity to have an A level versus a B or C level?
We can put it first here.
Oh, okay, then that's fine
Yeah.
too. Okay,
I'm
that's
saying I
fine.
think it
Better
is the
here?
most immediate of all of these.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we didn't
Yeah.
lose that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
So
number 1.
that's number 1. Outpatient Surgery Center, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 in the list, is probably,
Should be
Number
probably the
2.
second number 2. I think it's easier to do A and B, but okay.
All right, so if 2.7 I'm going to assume high priority because it's.
Yes.
And outpatient surgery, you said? Also a
That's
high
in-
priority?
Yes.
and then,
Receiving required reports is also, that's a third one. I think it's the third one.
yep,
Also high priority?
yes.
some point, something can be a medium priority. It's
Well, you know, I don't know why not. See, I'm a little leery about this vertical versus horizontal, because not the same person doesn't have to work on everything. So staff has to be allocated. So you're saying that we only can have one thing on top because it's the most important, and number two, I'm saying I'm not sure why. If certain things are determined to be high level, high priority, then that's gonna be delegation of responsibility by staff to get it done, and not the other way around, so.
So, for example, in this one, probably the one that we have listed first is medium priority, since it's going to be, I think it's going to be
Yes,
some time
yeah, or
before we
the
can
bottom.
actually get to it, yeah.
Yeah, so the first one can go at the bottom. See if you, yeah,
talking 2.1,
you're 2.1, yeah, you're,
and so 7, possibly?
yeah, put that at number 7 for now.
So we have 2.5, 2.2, and 2.3.
Well, expert reviewers,
So, the expert reviewer program,
I think that
I'd
comes
say
also.
would be the next in importance, also high priority.
Hi,
We've started the work, but needs to continue.
All right.
so you doing that 1, 2, or are you doing that on 1 through 7? Is it a 1, 2, everything under 1 and everything under 2, or are you doing?
Everything under 2 has its own separate numerical ranking. So we've got.
No, I know. Under number 2, goal number 2, there are 7
Yeah.
things.
So
And those 7 things, 3 of them can be at level 1 and 3, oh no, we're just doing numerical down the row. That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm
So
not
high,
clear.
medium, low importance, and then rank ordering.
I think we're trying to rank order them to start with, and that's maybe,
So,
see, because that's what we were doing, we were
sorry,
doing it.
I've complicated things, but.
Right.
Some of these are high importance, but would not be ranked first because they're not the most immediate. That doesn't detract from their importance in the medium and longer term in terms of consumer protection or the functioning of the medical board. But for feasibility reasons, the infrastructure isn't in place currently to address it. And I would, certainly in terms of what was 2.1, I think that is of medium priority. Eventually, it's high priority, but at this point in our deliberations, because we can't actually do it.
And by the same token, if you put the last one is what we have is number 1, so it would be F, or it would be number 7. You could also take the dispensing opticians, since that's going to happen anyway. It's going to take a little discussion, but it's not going to take a whole lot of energy. You could put that as number 6.
No,
No? Or at the beginning, I mean,
It's going to take some effort.
oh, it is going to take some
For
effort?
that, absolutely. We'll have to
Okay,
have
sorry.
interested parties meeting to discuss it. The placement of, if there was a choosing to move it, the placement of where it would go, there's some contention there. So it will take some discussion on this item.
And it has to be done.
It has to be done, so
soon.
it's also kind of immediate.
Yes,
So it
it's
needs
one
to
of
be
the
in the
ones
top
that's a
3
part
or
of
top 4?
sunset, so.
Top 3,
4.
top 4. So number 4 should be the opticians program, dispensing opticians 4. But we already have 4 as the expert reviewer thing, so that's my dilemma, as you see.
Bumped expert review to 5.
So is now gonna move 5? So that's why I'm saying that for me,
So-
it's easier to see it this way, and 1 and 2, like you'd suggest, I'll go along with it, but it's just, then everything should be.
Right now you have 4 high and 2 medium at the very end.
We got them all assigned now?
Yep.
Okay.
That was the largest of the objectives, so. All right, moving on to goal 3, consumer and licensee education. We have 5 objectives. A proposed number 1 priority.
I think the last one here is probably the first one we need to address.
3.5?
Public disclosure and tenure retention, public disclosure of postgraduate information and 10-year retention of disciplinary information. It's somewhat contentious and does need to be addressed.
So the last one has to move up.
Yeah.
Okay, and I would suggest that the one that needs to move down is the one above it, establish a method of holding public seminars.
Yes.
That can move to the bottom of the whole page, of the whole report.
It's a nice to have, as opposed to a need to have.
Yeah, this is, definitely an optional.
And above that would be the one above it.
Examine the opportunities for the board
Yeah.
trained licensees, yeah, that goes along with they go together at the bottom of the pile, in my opinion.
All right, so the proposal was for 3.4 to be a 5 priority, technically.
1, 2, 3, 4. 3 and 4 to be 5 and 5.
5 and 4.
5 and 4. Or 5 and 5. I said 5 and 5.
You know, I'm going to
They're
guess on
tied
medium
for
priority.
last place in
Tied for
Barbara's
last
mind.
place, you got it?
That would
I'm
make
not
them both
opinionated at
4.
all, I'm sorry.
That would
all
make
right.
them both 4, actually, unless you want to have a placeholder for some blank 3.
I was thinking maybe you have some free time in there so you could devote some to other.
All right, I think I might have. Okay, so 3.4, 5, possibly medium priority. 3.5, first priority, high, theoretically.
So the public disclosure would be first. I would argue that, or suggest that 3.1 become 3.2,
No.
or become number 2. And then the one following that would be number 3. No, yeah, thank you.
So which one are you putting as number 3?
3.3 is number 3.
You're going to leave 3 as 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
Any suggestions or challenges from the board members?
Well, where are we at 1 and 2?
I'm sorry?
Where number 1 is going to be,
2?
yeah, that's fine, I like it like that.
Any thoughts or suggestions on this? We good? All right, moving on to goal 4. The 3 proposed objectives: build collaborative relationships, optimize relationships, improve educational outreach.
I'd say the bottom one has to come to the top. The middle one has to come second, and the top one has to come to last. The more important one is to improve educational outreach to hospital, health systems, and similar organizations. I think, no?
I like to build relationships with elected officials and their staff.
Okay, that's fine.
I think so, too.
Okay. Since I already have them, I'm sorry, I just,
No, then we can put that
no,
one
no,
as
it's
number
fine.
2.
So 1, 3, 2.
1, 3, 2, yes.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Deb?
It's fine.
All right. About done here. Okay. Goal 5, there are 5 proposed objectives.
I think the bottom one is important. With licensing application, I mean, I don't know how to do this, because licensing applications, we're doing really, really well. Kurt, I'm sorry, you're doing such a good job.
I would suggest combining 1 and 2. These are the licensing and enforcement metrics
Okay,
that we're setting in the plan. And I think
put them together
put them together
as number,
as number 1.
as number 1, okay.
And then we will likely revisit these numbers every year to see whether we can set more aggressive goals or how we're
That
doing.
makes sense, that's good.
Um,
Do you want me to merge 5.1 and 5.2 into
Yeah.
one objective?
Could we have them as separate, but just do them both as one? Because that way we can build, they're different items that we have to build under them.
Okay.
hmm?
No, just.
You didn't have any public comment on number 4, does that matter? There was no public, okay.
Just
So number 5, so to take number 5.1 and 5.2 and put 5.1A and 5.1B? Is that what you're,
I would just, I think Sharon's got the right way to do it, and that is, they touch on licensing and enforcement, obviously, but you know that from reading it. And let's see how it looks in one combined objective.
Kim is suggesting they're different goals.
But when you start going down to the details,
Yeah.
you're probably talking about different people doing the work.
It still can be incorporated under the, you can have different tactics assigned to different staff people under an objective. It doesn't, I mean, another way of stating 1 and 2 is, these are the measurable outcomes of our 2 key functions, which we're setting numerical goals for, and saying that that's the highest priority in terms of how others will, and we will judge ourselves and others will judge us in terms of organizational effectiveness. Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you, you sound very good, except you're losing your voice.
Yeah.
Make sure it says 10%, it's set by 10.
Yeah.
So would the board like me to keep it as 2 separate objectives?
No, one objective combined, 5.1.
Review licensing applications within 45 days. Reduce discipline complaint processing and investigation timelines by 10% from last fiscal year. Is that correct? Prior fiscal year. Reduce complaint processing median to less than 70 days, with 50 to 60% less than 50 days.
Let me just ask you a question about those 2 specifically, since that's the main focus of what the responsibility of the board is to be. Should they now be changed in goals, so that should be your first goal versus your last goal? Your organizational
No.
effectiveness, or no? How do you do that? It's okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay, as long as it's okay, I'm fine.
Yeah, they're not, the goals are not in priority
Okay.
of importance, they're not in order of importance.
Okay.
And I think the rest of these can stay as they are.
All with a high priority?
Yep.
Well, wait a
No.
second, so staff, educating the staff about the board's activities, and the board's activities about the staff, is that more important or less important than feedback from the users about the board services? You think it's more important to have, it doesn't matter?
Doesn't, you want to change it, that's fine.
I mean,
To me, they're high importance.
Yeah, that's why I was just wondering, all of them are high priority?
Yeah.
Then we have basically nothing which is medium and low. Okay, that's
They
fine.
don't have to be all high. If there's a proposal to switch it to a low, medium or low priority
Yes,
based on
it-
resources.
We want it all, we don't want just half of it.
So I think I heard a recommendation to move the feedback from those who access board services to higher than the educating board and staff about one another's activities. So just switching those
Yeah, I
two.
would. I mean,
So in that
but I
order,
could be wrong.
1, 4, 3, 2?
Sounds good.
Are any of them medium priority? The evaluation of committees? High priority?
That's probably medium.
That's medium priority for sure, because the chair can always change
Other than
it.
one, everything else in my mind is medium, but
Other
than the top one, everything else is medium, but go along. It's-
Agree, disagree?
Educating the board, is that a high priority or a low priority? Staff and board? A medium, I mean, not low, but medium? It's high?
I think we can go medium.
Huh?
I'm just suggesting medium.
Medium,
I
fine,
think
fine,
so,
medium.
too.
Fine,
I was so opinionated in the beginning, I didn't want to still be opinionated.
that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's it for goal 5.
Yeah.
And then goal 6, there's one, so it doesn't really need a number. And I'm going to assume high priority.
Yes.
Okay, that is it for evaluating the strategic plan.
So just, I want to give the members of the public any opportunity to comment.
Can we have the air conditioning turned down?
And I will. We're just,
Can we have the air conditioning turned down? There's an energy crisis in the state of California, I'm sure, somewhere.
okay.
Maybe not in Riverside.
So I'm going to, seeing no comments from the members of the public, I'm going to move to agenda item 5 and ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved. Oh, second. Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Just wanted to wrap up a couple slides.
Oh, sorry.
All right. No problem.
We thought
I just wanted to give you an idea of the next steps from this. So obviously, I'm going to take this back to Kim and work with staff, and we will assign tactics to each of these objectives. And then we will submit that revised draft to the board for adoption at the February board meeting. And then upon that, we'll release it to the board website.
Not sooner?
That's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Not sooner? That's our next board meeting. I mean, why don't you do it for 3 years? Yeah, it's in 3 years. we should do it.
Okay. You're welcome, Tom.
Thanks.
And you got active participation.
Definitely did. Thank you very much.
So we have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And are we meeting back here at 4 o'clock? So for the enforcement committee, and we'll see if we can warm the room up just a little bit. And thank you all for your patience.
Your cell phones either silent or take them off the table. And if you have smartphones, we all do, take them off the table because they do give feedback. For the public, you may notice that the committee members are using their laptops, so as like mine here. That's the way they're getting the materials, not playing any video games like whoever it was. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment and ask for the public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the committee's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I will ask the person to conduct himself or herself in such a manner that permits the board to transact its business. Committee welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the committee's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. I want to remind all speakers to please stay on the topic and keep your comments within 3 minutes or less. I would like to call the meeting to the order and ask me, we did that. Approval of the minutes. The minutes of the July meeting are in front of you. Can we?
First, public comments not on the agenda.
That was on mine 3. So we have a little with the I have on mine as an item 3, but public comment on the agenda items, which on the items not on the agenda. Do we have any comment? Okay, there are. That ends the item. The next one is approval. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
So
Board
moved.
members?
Second.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
You have to ask if there's any opposed or abstentions.
Are there any opposed or abstentions? Forgive me, this is the first meeting I'm starting, so. And even a surgeon gets a little nervous. Update on the plans for transition of staff pursuant to SB 304. Ms. Kirschmeyer and Mr. Gomez.
Good afternoon. I would like to begin by introducing the representatives from the Department of Consumer Affairs who are here today with me. To my far left is Mr. Awet Kadani, who is the Chief Deputy Director at the Department of Consumer Affairs. And also here today is Mr. Michael Gomez. He's the Deputy Director of the Division of Investigation and Enforcement Programs. So we'll be co-presenting today on this item. So I'm going to be kicking this off. We will have been holding meetings to discuss the transition. Our hope is to make the transition as seamless as possible. Today, we will be going over the transition of the investigators to the newly formed special unit entitled Health Quality Investigation Unit within the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation. Today, we will not be discussing administrative specifics such as the contracts that will be transferred or the process of moving the positions and those types of items. At the February meeting, we will provide documentation on all of these items. We are still in discussion on some of these items as well. Today, we will be focusing on the actual transition of processes and what this new process will look like. We will discuss how it impacts the board's investigation and administrative process, as well as how it impacts the vertical enforcement process. The board's packet has flow charts that I will be going through to assist in this process. Mr. Kadani and Mr. Gomez will be going over the implementation plan and providing the timelines for the transition. With that, I would like to begin by asking you to turn to tab 4 or page enforcement ENF 4-1. And I will be going over just briefly the memo that's there attached. But before I do that, I want to kick this off to Mr. Kadani and Mr. Gomez if they have anything to add before we get into that. Okay. All right, so if you turn to that tab, in the first 4 pages, it provides a written analysis of the transition. I just want to point out a few things. If you look at the document itself, you'll see right in the beginning, the bill actually has changes that would move the board's investigators, which are our peace officers or sworn positions, medical consultants, and all of the support staff for those positions to a new unit within the Department of Consumer Affairs. So basically, those individuals will now become employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. According to the bill, it will take place no later than July 1st, 2014. And it also states specifically in the language that all civil service employees will retain their position, status, and rights as employees. The new HQIU is what we're calling it. Will perform investigations not only for our board, but for all the boards currently that they're performing services for. So as well as our other healing arts boards that we do functions for, like licensed midwifery, RDO program, etc. So they'll be taking that over as well. It also specifically states that the board cannot be charged an hourly rate by the Health Quality Investigation Unit. As most of you may remember, when we first started this, when Dr. Levine and I went to testify, it was real clear that we told them we didn't want this to be any additional cost to the board, and so this was the way they put in the what we were looking for, cost neutrality. So that's that part in there. And then the last thing that I really want to point out is it retains the vertical enforcement prosecution model. It just transitions that over to the Division of Investigation to work with the AG's office during the investigation process. So with that, if I can figure out how to use the pointer. Okay. Oh, it's not very good, so I'll just walk you through. So if we can turn to the first flow chart there. This is our current enforcement process prior to Senate Bill 304 passage. This is on 4-6. I just want to point out that the items in red actually show things where the board has control and items that are currently performed by positions that will be transferred. So if you look at this chart, you'll notice that once the complaint's received, and the other thing I want to point out is this is all being performed by the Medical Board of California. There, you'll see that. So these are all functions that are currently performed within the medical board. So the complaint is received. Obviously, it's triaged by our central complaint unit. They look at it. If it needs further investigation, then it transfers to our district office. And I'm sorry if some of this is what you already know, but this is the only way we can kind of walk through how it changes. So once it goes to the district office, then the investigation of the case begins. It's assigned to both an investigator and a DAG, a Deputy Attorney General, at the Health Quality Enforcement section. And then they proceed through that process, and then together those two make a final disposition on the case. That final disposition is looked at by our Chief of Enforcement, our Deputy Chief, or by the supervising investigators and review that decision. then you can see where that branches off, and basically the outcomes of those cases would be the case either gets closed, so again, those are being reviewed. It would either be going for a citation and fine, and again, once that goes for citation and fine, the informal conference is performed by the chief of enforcement or the supervising investigators or the deputy chief. It could also be referred to the medical board health quality, to the medical board back to headquarters for the issuance of a pre-accusation PLR. Again, that function and the negotiation of that public letter of reprimand with the respondent and or his attorney is all performed by our chief of enforcement. The other thing that it could do is it could be referred to the DA's office, and again, that is monitored currently by our Office of Standards and Training Unit, and they monitor and track all of the criminal activity. The other thing that could happen is it's referred to the Attorney General's office for appropriate action, and then that begins the prosecution of that case. So as you'll see there, once it goes over, then the Health Quality Enforcement section will take that and file the pleadings and take the disciplinary action necessary. Again, during that time, our chief of enforcement and our deputy chief, as well as our supervising investigators out in the field, all have settlement authority. So when a deputy attorney general wants to offer up a recommendation for settlement, that comes into our chief, and they go back and forth with the deputy attorney general. They're also available for any settlement conferences. So that's currently our process. Then from there, it goes to the full board. Of course, we are all your decisions that you see, the stipulations or the proposed decisions, and then the board makes that final decision on disciplinary action. That's our current process, okay? Are there any questions on that before I move to the next one?
Any questions from board members?
Yes.
Just one clarification. Under the first box, case closed. So it's the DAG and the investigators who make the determination to close the case.
Yes.
And what is the in red on that box at the top to ensure appropriate action? Does that mean that it was executed the way it was intended?
They have two functions. They're really looking at it to see if it was done appropriately. They're also looking to make sure that they agree with that activity of closure. There could be sometimes that they don't agree and they think that more evidence should be requested on this case, and then they can go back and it will go through a process where they review that with the Deputy Attorney General, and there's a process of going through a hierarchy where it starts out with the supervising investigator, it could go to the two, then to the Deputy Chief, and ultimately to the Chief, as well as Gloria, Ms. Castro, to basically reconcile any differences in that. Okay.
Any other questions? If not, go ahead, proceed, please.
Okay. So how is this going to change with the passage of SB 304? So as you can see, now we have another entity who's involved in the review of this case. So again, the case will come in, and again, it will be under the board's control now to review that case and determine if additional investigation needs to be performed. If it's required that further investigation needs to be done, it will now go over to the Division of Investigation Health Quality Investigation Unit for the investigation. That Health Quality Enforcement, HQIU, will work with the Attorney General's office to perform the functions of investigation. Where it will be different now is those individuals are now all employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. So any of the decisions you saw in red on the prior page, they should no longer be making those decisions, because again, they're not employees of the board, and that final outcome on what happens with this case and the ultimate referral from that point needs to come from the board approval. And they won't have that authority any longer under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So as you can see, it goes over, they perform the investigation, but now it will come back over to the medical board once that investigation is completed, and an individual, a position at the medical board, will have to take over all of those functions. So they'll be reviewing the case to make sure that they agree with the recommendation by the investigators and the Attorney General's office. And if not, then they're going to be the ones discussing that with the Attorney General's office and probably also with the HQIU, as well as then an individual at the medical board needs to review the final action for a citation and fine and be now available to do informal conferences, because it needs to be a board employee that has that authority of any outcomes on an informal conference for a citation and fine, and also signing off on the citation and fine, which is what Ms. Threadgill used to do in the past. That will have to be now done by the board. The other thing is for pre-accusation PLRs, that will have to be done now with an individual within the board, as well as the monitoring and tracking. That will just be an added function that we will follow through on the case. The referral will still continue out of the Division of Investigation or the HQIU, but monitoring that case and everything will be under the board. Then the other place where it changes is in the past, where it was the Chief of Enforcement that was reviewing the settlements and signing off on that settlement authority. Now that will be under somebody else within the medical board to provide that authority and be available for settlement conferences. But ultimately, the board still, again, has the final action on that case. Dr.
Ms. Kashmir, so who you are expecting at the board to do the first function you mentioned, that is authorized once that comes to you, comes to the board?
At this time, we haven't identified a position. That's something we're going to be working on, whether we have to redirect a position or how we're going to be doing that. We'll be looking at that within the medical board over the next couple months to identify that.
Okay, and the same for the second one, that is?
Yeah. We believe that probably all of these functions could be performed by one individual at the board.
New position.
How is this going to change the timeline or the expected timeline? The order sounds to be there's another step now.
There is another step in the review. I would hope that we would have a process where that can be reviewed quickly and responded to. In just talking about the case, even in discussions with Ms. Threadgill, what we're hoping is that the investigative unit would basically hold on to that case. We would get the information as much as we can do to review it, then we would approve it and then send them a note, okay, go ahead and refer that on to the Attorney General's office. Or, if it's a citation and fine or a pre-accusation PLR, we're going to get it all just like we would right now. That process will still be there as what we do right now. It's just there's not a Renee or a Ms. Threadgill doing it. There will be somebody within the medical board doing it.
Is that because Ms. Threadgill is going to the Department of HQIU?
Yes, she's a peace officer, so her position would go over to HQIU.
And that position doesn't, because we have the final authority, that's why it has to come back to us.
Right, right.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, then I want to talk a little bit, I'm sorry, I have to close out here.
Dev?
Dr. Levine.
Just a comment, these charts are very helpful
Thank you.
in understanding the before and after.
Okay. Then how does this impact vertical prosecution? I know that's a question among the members that they have. So as you go through this chart, this on page 4-8, this is really what we currently do with the vertical enforcement process. So you'll see again, the complaint is received and reviewed by our complaint unit. Then it's referred to the field, and then you'll see at the same time going over, a lead prosecutor will be assigned to the case, and together they will determine if an investigation is warranted, if an ISO is warranted, and any other type of activity. So they'll be working on it together. Then from there, an investigator does an investigative plan and provides it to the Deputy Attorney General. And under VE, the Deputy Attorney General reviews the plan, and then they have to make suggestions and then approve that final plan. Then from there, the investigation is conducted. Back over on the medical board side, looking over there, the investigation is completed. However, as they're going through the process of obtaining records, through the interviews, through the medical consultant review and expert review, the investigator is providing all of this information and written reports and updates to the Deputy Attorney General, who's providing feedback and follow-up on their investigative activities, and then they also sit in on the interviews as well as in the expert reviewer selection. So that's all going on currently. Then once the determination is made of the outcome, the disposition, Then the Deputy Attorney General and Supervising Investigator determine that appropriate action, and then from there the case will proceed either to closure or into the administrative process where the DAG and the investigator will work together to prosecute that case. So that's our current process.
So are what we going to have now is a vertical enforcement three-way operation? Is that what
The
we're
next
doing?
slide will cover that specifically.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
Okay. All right. Okay.
Three-way. We're going to have a three-way.
So,
Just want to make sure law enforcement's up on there.
so if you go to the next slide, which is on 4-9 now, you'll see that, as Ms. Yaroslavsky has pointed out, now we actually have 3 groups working on vertical enforcement prosecution. And really, the vertical enforcement is going to be just with the 2 units within the Division of Investigation and the Attorney General's office, but the medical board, again, will have input into that. So if you look at the next chart, you'll see again, the medical board receives the complaint. They will refer it to the HQIU, who's now, that group is going to be the one working with the Attorney General's office to identify the appropriate plan for investigation, the one doing the interviews in coordination with the Attorney General's office. Everything under there basically stays the same. It's just that it is not the medical board performing those duties. It's the employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Once it gets down to the disposition of that investigation, again, you'll see there in the lower 2 areas where you'll see the DAG and supervising DAG, they will still determine that, but again, it will go back over to the medical board where they will review the case to ensure the appropriate action is being taken and that they agree with that action. And then from there, the case will proceed through the administrative process. The DAG will be working with the investigator from the HQIU because that's their expert or their investigator in the case if they have any questions. But it will be the medical board who's filing the accusation, who's taking the final action, and proceeding through that disciplinary process, as well as looking at that settlement as we spoke of before. So that shows you how the vertical enforcement prosecution will change.
So let me ask you a question. Are these our same employees that are moving, or are they new employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs?
There are employees that are moving.
So no new employees, no new hires, just the same people, new titles, new bosses, new salary structure, higher salary structure, better benefits.
Member Awad Kidani, Chief Deputy of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Same employees. I don't want to get out ahead of the process and start speaking to whom and salary, who's coming over, where they're going to be. But before, we have a process and we have a timeline to address those. The most important thing to gather out of this part of the conversation is it is the department's intent with regard to this component not to disrupt, the current functions. I believe the Med Board and the department can learn from each other with regard to the processes. And in order for us to be successful, us collectively, we have to learn, adapt, and that requires us learning from staff who are currently doing what they do. So we do not want to disrupt anything.
I think my concern is this, is that I've read through this. I kind of understand what is the perception of what's supposed to happen, but the devil is in the details.
That's
okay?
correct.
So the idea of taking a group of employees who are currently doing a job with an administrative hierarchy that they all understand are doing it, they're now being moved and placed into another department where they're going to have new oversights and new engagement and new help that wasn't there before. I'm just trying to understand that from where is the medical board in this, is that now we have a consultant in the DCA that's more engaged and more involved. So I'm just trying to understand from what we do, as far as what we read, are cases going to be held up, take longer? Because DCA hasn't been a party to helping us understand what we're supposed to be doing at the Med Board currently.
And I understand that. One thing I do want to point out that I missed in here is this is the way several other boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs perform their investigations. in that the boards get to the point to where they're ready to investigate the case, and then it goes over to the Division of Investigation, not into our specialized unit. It is a little bit different because they only do it up to the point where the investigation's closed, not the expert review, but, so this will be similar to
But in
that.
all due fairness, ours is a vertical enforcement, vertical prosecution
True, that
model,
is
which is
different.
totally different.
Yes.
And it's also, I didn't read the Board of Registered Nursing is within that, so that's separate, so that we're now the new largest entity that's moving, so it's a whole new pathway.
And according to the legislation, it is specific to the functions, that health quality investigative unit. They've named it in the legislation. They've stated that it's the employees that are there that will transfer, and that they will perform those specific functions of the board.
Right, so they're gonna perform the functions that they currently have been performing, but in a new house.
Yes.
Okay, I understand.
Well, let me clarify that. It's kind of in a new house, but we're not moving anybody. Everybody's staying in the district offices. No employees are being moved to the Division of Investigation, to our field offices. They're all staying where they currently are. On July 1st of next year, no employee should be dislocated or moved or anything. They're going to stay
Okay, that I did not understand.
with,
Thank you for
with
that
the medical
clarification.
board. They're going to be there.
So the phones are gonna be the same, or
The
they're gonna be
phones are going to
different
be the same.
numbers,
The
or?
phones are, no, they're going to be the same numbers, except, with the exception maybe with the exception of maybe a couple of the headquarters staff people that will be supporting this.
It's not like we're merging two entities together. We're not.
The
And that's-
reporting relationship, the reporting line has changed, is what's happened.
Right, but so the reporters, the people that are being reported out from the current positions that are being moved to a new house, they're gonna be reporting to a new entity or a new structure.
And yes,
Yes, okay.
yes, but the employees will remain intact into those existing district offices as we have today in your.
So from the consumer's perspective, what is the consumer going to see more involvement, more engagement, shorter timelines, faster turnaround, or are they going to see this, I mean, what should we be looking for?
I hope that in our presentation, when we talk about the transition plan, that the discovery of all those efficiencies, the discovery of what our current business practices are, the discovery of how we're going to be working with the health quality enforcement section of the Attorney General's office, looking at the vertical enforcement manual to revise that. And I think Kim and I have even talked about that there's going to be need to analyze and to work with our staffs and to make that a better product for the consumers, for the model we call vertical prosecution, in the best interest of the public and best interest of the patients.
Could I also add to that, Mr. Yaroslavsky? Thank you. I feel it important for the department to hold itself accountable through this process. This is law. We have to implement it, and we have to do it in the best interest of the consumers as well as our two entities. The department owes it to this body to get this right, and the Med Board needs us to get this right.
Absolutely.
I concede that. For that reason, what the transition team, which I'll speak to in my presentation, has proposed is that we use Med Board's current statistics, current numbers, and hold ourselves accountable by that, no less. And for us to glean efficiencies, for us to leverage relationships that my colleague to my right has, even myself that I have, and kick the tires, check the oil, et cetera, we should start seeing ticks in those numbers. If we don't, I will hold myself accountable and we'll keep adapting and getting better. And I would expect this board to also hold us accountable. So that's what I'm pushing for through this process.
I can appreciate that, and I apologize. I think that my concern, and to make sure that this is going to work, is that we also need to know what the process is to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable. So that's
Agreed.
why I'm asking so many questions. So I apologize for.
Thank you. There is a long presentation, but what I personally am expecting is that this board is responsible for all these actions. We are contracting with you in a legal way through by law to perform these functions. in the end,
That's correct.
we are the ultimate responsible people, and we hold you accountable for what happens. That's the way I'm looking at it. If I'm wrong, let me know, either of you.
Mr. Chairman, you're spot on that, and I appreciate the candor, and I appreciate it now and will continue to appreciate you and this body holding us accountable. I'm a true believer in transparency. I'm a true believer in if you're held accountable for something, you tend to perform at that top performance. I played sports. So when you're held accountable, you tend to perform better. So I look forward to you guys holding us accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Kidani. Dr. Yap.
This is the first time I'm on the committee, so maybe we're doing already. Just looking at that flow chart on the left-hand corner, usually board member, we at a position that actually the medical take action and come to the member panel A and B review. Just move one box up, the case reviewed by MPs to ensure appropriate action. What is the role of the enforcement committee now or in the future in this process? Are we seeing like aging account, like what kind of cases that being reviewed by the division and the timeline? Are we looking at every quarter the nature of the cases and whether they in the process being reviewed, in the process the passing which direction three-way and then which is closed? Are we looking at those numbers as enforcement committee members?
So the board itself, actually, you'll see in Ms. Threadgill's statistics that are in the packet, it's very specific in each time frame. If you look at those statistics, and you'll see them in the full board packet, we have so many identifiers from step A to B, B to C, C to D, and what you currently have in your statistics, Dr. Yip, and we will continue to have those after we make this transition. Mr. Kodani and I were involved in the BREEZE project, and we've talked about how our investigators are still going to maintain the BREEZE system and still maintain it the way that they're currently doing in order for us to be able to still get those reports. There will be a time, I can tell you right now, that we will not have those statistics probably at the February meeting because we are building the reports that we currently have in the BREEZE system, but we will have them hopefully by the May meeting to where we can pick up to where we are right now. But those same statistics will be captured. The one thing I want to tell you too is the committee and the board members are not involved in that review at that point. That's the investigation portion of the process, and you're not involved in that, nor should you be at that point, because you have to be impartial judges for the administrative action at the end.
Right,
So
we're not
you're
in
involved
that
in
role. I'm just saying we would like to know the time process so
Oh,
that
you have those
we'll be
statistics
responsible.
currently
Yeah,
right now in your
Right,
packet.
we do have it,
and
but
we
in
will
the future we also
absolutely we have every plan to keep those same statistics because, as Mr. Kodani said, that's the only way you're going to know if there's any improvement or if there's slippage or
Right.
or if we're staying the same. That's the only way we'll know at that point. So I just had on pages 4-10 and 4-11, I'm not going to go through those, but those are the organization charts that we have put together with our current structure, and then also moving forward with the structure of where, sorry, I think I'm backwards, the new plan and then the current structure. So I'm not going to go.
411 is current, 410 is proposed.
Thank you. Yes, I was
Right.
backwards. And so anyway, with that, I'm going to kick it off to Mr. Gomez and Mr. Kodani to really go through the implementation plan, as I believe I've discussed. Yeah.
Back to the proposed,
Can you use your mic, Mr. Stonek?
back to the proposed flow chart.
Yes.
Forgive my ignorance. What is CEA again?
A
G
CEA
for-
is a career executive assignment.
Ah. What is that? Is that like a supervisor or what is that?
It is. It's like a higher level
Senior?
supervisor position. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then with that, I'm going to kick it off to them to go through the implementation plan.
Extension cord.
You try and get one through state service. I'm sure that they'd be very happy to find supplies for you. Supplies, yeah. It's under the.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you again. Awad Gadani, Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. As was previously stated in some of the questions that we answered and testimony by your executive officer, 304 was signed into law and will be in effect July 2013. That is a lot of pressure.
14.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Passed already.
It's even
14.
more pressure.
You already did it, is that what you're
That's
saying?
right. That is a lot of pressure, and the reason why I'm stressing that is that pressure requires a tremendous amount of communication between your staff and also myself and my staff in order for this to work as envisioned in the law. The law did not envision us to disrupt anything. The law did not envision us to take anything away, a service from the consumer. In that, and given the importance of getting this right, the department has formed a transition committee attended by, and who's part of that committee is your executive officer, myself, Mr. Gomez next to me, my Deputy of Legislation, Christine Lally, Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations. The reason behind that is we want to get as many eyes on this as possible and ferret out the problems and challenges before it gets too far down the road. We've had a few meetings thus far and have been going very well. Your executive officer has given us input, different ways of looking at things, how this board does business on a granular level. That's information that we need to hear in order so we can adapt. This is not a one-way process. This is us merging together, for the best interest of the consumers. The last part I want to stress, which is me being here is very important. This is my project, and I want the board to know that it is imperative for the department to be as transparent as humanly possible. If the department and the board are wondering anything, or if there's any veil, then we're doing something wrong. The board should never wonder about what the numbers are. We're providing a service to this board. Pursuant to the statute, I mean, you said it very, very eloquently. So it is my intent to be as transparent through this process and even post-process as we are with every other board that Mr. Gomez provides service to. I will turn it over to Mr. Gomez and also entertain questions from the board after his testimony. I really appreciate the board accommodating me today. Thank you.
Well, I guess it's still good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the Enforcement Committee, Madam Chair. Your interim executive director and your board chair had asked that we appear this afternoon to go through a transition plan and walk through it with you. So if you have any questions, we can do that when we get to it. But I'd like to do a couple things before I make my presentation. First of all, I want to look at Kim and say, Kim, I appreciate your coming to me and outreaching to the Division of Investigation at the signage when this bill was signed, and actually started working with us in collaboration of how we were going to walk through this together. And she's been very supportive to me. She's been very supportive to our initial steps in our transition team, and I just want to tell you thank you. Your spirit has been great. The three things I want to talk about is I want to give you a little background on who I am, what is the Division of Investigation, where the employees are going, and then look at the transition plan itself. I was appointed by Governor Brown last year, this month actually, as Deputy Director of the Division of Investigation and Enforcement Programs. I've been a law enforcement officer for about 25 years. Half of that time has been as an executive with as a bureau chief with the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training with the California Department of Justice, and almost a decade as the chief of the Division of Investigation prior to that. The division's mission has been one where we service and provide investigative services on behalf of the client boards, regulatory agencies, and the Department of Consumer Affairs. And our mission is to protect the consumers through that work that we do, to uphold the law, to work with our boards and our clients, and work with the Attorney General's office in the best interest of the patients and the public. You know what, we have some handouts right there. I've put the slide presentation that I'm giving on some handouts for you, and also a brochure that gives you a quick Good Housekeeping magazine look at who the division is. The organizational chart that's in front of you is similar to that which you see in your attachment in your binders that relates to the Medical Board of California. We're an investigative agency that deals with field operations. All of our investigators are peace officers under 830.3 of the Penal Code, and we share the same Penal Code authority as the current Medical Board of investigators do under that statute. The difference is we are not in vertical prosecution where the Medical Board is. As my chief deputy has said, is that we are committed not only to working with this board and committed to working with your interim executive director and the staff, but we are and we have to embrace the vertical enforcement prosecution model, and hopefully we can achieve some achievements through that collaboration as to how to make it work better. The next slide is simply in your packet, is just kind of gives you a brief description of the division, and so you have a kind of a picture, if you will, of where the employees would be reporting to, so to speak. As I said earlier in the presentation, on July 1st, we do not envision any of your employees being moved from their current location or their district offices or from their places of work, or relocating them, anything like that. This is a simple move at this time until we follow that transition process to determine where the needs are, where the investigative efficiencies could be achieved, and more importantly, by talking to our employees and talking to the Attorney General's office, and with the Medical Board executives, is what would be in the best interest in terms of implementing the law that we have before us. The next chart that I have provided is just, you already have this in your binder, is the proposed organizational chart, and you'll see that what has happened is that we've basically taken, or cut, I guess is a better word, taken that portion of the law that says that the peace officers, the medical consultants, and support staff would be transferred to the Division of Investigation under the new Health Quality Investigations Unit. So the org chart, you'll see, it basically adds the staff to the reporting relationship of the division within the division itself, okay? Again, we're not moving anybody from their current work locations or their current work status. I think that Kim and I have made a pretty good reasoning that it's important for us to follow the transition plan before we do anything right now. We can't represent anything. There's a lot of moving parts, and I think until we know how those parts are going to fit through that process and through the assessment that we're going to provide with that transition team, the better off we're going to be. And now I'd like to get into the transition plan itself. And that is in your packet as attachment A. And the major component, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, is there a question?
Just a question about the medical consultants. They don't show up on...
What I did in the chart was, my understanding is they're already reporting to the district offices.
Right, but... Yeah. And to whom, I'm actually not clear to whom they report in the district.
Well, I think it's two people, right? To the supervising investigator of the district offices.
So that relationship will remain the same?
Remains the same.
Function will remain the same?
Function will remain the same. Okay.
You will wait while we're there.
Yeah, do you have other investigative offices in all these areas for what the other work you do, DCA?
Yes, the chart that I think was number 2 in your packet, you'll see at the bottom, we have a headquarters operation, which is our internal affairs, our training, and our support, if you will. And then we have two areas, a south and a north. So we have a field office in Lakewood, one in San Diego, Ontario, Chatsworth, in the north, Central Valley, Sacramento, then another Sacramento location, and in Hayward, Bay Area as well.
So your aim is to consolidate some of these offices later on, or I'm just trying to see what?
That's not my aim. My aim is to implement what is required by law at this point. That's one of those moving parts that I don't have control over, and I don't think your interim executive officer does either, or director. We don't have that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a business perspective. That's why I'm just asking these questions. So.
Very astute question, Mr. Chairman. That's definitely not DCA's aim. Definitely not part of the transition plan. That's part of your packet. However, as leases come up, Department of General Services oftentimes, and I've been through it myself, will say, you have an office here, you have an office here, this lease is up, how about this idea of merging? That is not far from, the realm of reality. That could very well happen depending on when leases are up. Will not disrupt daily functions, will not disrupt anybody, the way business is done. It's just the way Department of General Services manages their tremendous real estate portfolio, and a way for them to consolidate and maximize their dollar.
And that's correct, Doctor. And I think Kim will tell you that even in our current separate structures, we have that challenge a lot of times where they want to co-locate our investigative staff with the Department of Corrections staff or with Caltrans or somebody just for that business reason, for the lease and the overhead. They'll do that as well. Yeah.
And I gather that you don't have any plans to consolidate staff positions at this time.
We do not. We do not have that.
Okay.
No, we don't.
So on the org chart that we have, don't go too fast yet. You're Michael Gomez, and you're the deputy director.
Yes.
Above you is the executive director. Is that?
Above me is
Mr. Kidani.
But that's not you. So who is that person? What's the executive director of this? Is this you? On the new proposed? Is that Denise, or is that?
Denise is the director.
She's the executive director.
No.
Denise is the director of the.
On this org chart.
She's looking at your chart.
That's our chart,
That's gone
only
away.
for medical board. You need to switch now for proposed over to page.
Attachment H.
To the current, no, it's current to proposed.
4-14.
And I don't have it. I'll take your word for it.
Look in the slide presentation that I gave you. It should be in that one. It should be the last page.
What I'm just trying to figure out is the transition team. Okay, I got it. It's here. So you, Michael Gomez, the deputy director, number 2 person in the old chart. Now in the new chart, you're the number 1 person.
In the old chart,
Well, anyway, currently, what it's going to be, I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
When we're holding feet to the fire, you report to us because we are contracting with you?
No.
You to report to DCA. So now we have DCA who are providing a service that they haven't provided to us before, really.
correct.
So now we really have not 2 bosses, we have 1 boss, but 2 bosses? No?
I don't know if I could try to take a stab at it. But
I'm concerned, it's just,
No,
it's
it's
sounding
fair.
like it's not doing what I thought it was gonna originally do.
Well,
That's my-
here's-
yeah.
And that's up for debate, but the law is the law, and that's
Oh, I
our.
understand the
it's
law is
our-
the law, but I'm trying to make
this is-
sure-
Let me express myself.
Yeah,
The law
please.
is the law, and it's our duty to faithfully execute it, period. And so, it is what it is. This function is moving to the Department of Consumer Affairs under Mr. Gomez's unit. He is a deputy director. He reports to the gentleman. The gentleman reports to the director, goes up the chain of
Right.
command. These duties, these job classifications, all that stuff, they're now under the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Okay, that's what I wanna make sure of.
Yeah, and
what it
it's
is. Okay,
exact,
that's
so it's
okay.
it's worth highlighting that point because.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah,
Well, I
they
didn't
do
wanna ask
not
it
re-
that way directly, but yes,
Well,
that's
they
the
do,
question.
it's another way to look at it. they do not report to this board.
That's what I
They
wanted
don't.
to understand.
You know, the collaborative working together, the open lines of communication, the transparency, all this is crucial to ensure the success of the legislation and the law. But the reporting, the strict reporting and the way it is as, you know, as is being described right now.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
We have some oversight on other stuff, but this day-to-day management is the duty of the gentleman.
Yeah, it's very similar to the AG's office. You pay the AG's office to perform a service of prosecuting our cases, and you will pay the Division of Investigation a cost for providing an investigative service. So it's, so in some degree, they are your vendor. They're performing services for you.
Right, but the collaboration that was between the AG and our offices through the vertical enforcement, vertical prosecution model is going to be now handled. Okay.
Precisely.
It's a triangular entity now instead of two entities. That is Medical Board, DCA, and the AG's office. And we, as I mentioned before, we as the Medical Board expect both agencies to perform what we are legally, by law, contracted out. That's all it is. So, but we are ultimately responsible, but that part is done instead of inside the Medical Board, it's done by DCA.
Okay, thank you.
And they report to their own boss.
That is absolutely correct. I do want to stress this point with regard to the triangular, the new triangular relationship that we have now. It is my anticipation that that will not slow down or impede any process, because one, the AG's intent is to move these cases, you know, albeit complex and numerous, but it's in their best interest. It's also in our best interest to help them and assist them, to give them the data, to give them the evidence that they need. Mr. Gomez is an expert in this. I marvel at his knowledge of this. It's very deep. I also tend to push with regard to numbers. I have that bad habit. And as we get through this transition plan, the law is the law, and it basically says vertical enforcement starts at the point of complaint. That's really early. And with that, the AG will be our partner through this, throughout the entire process. So I'm actually pretty excited about how this will work out.
And just to add to what Mr. Gadani has said, is that, you know, the department's performance measures actually measure those three components. You know, the complaint part, which is at the medical board, the investigation part, the investigation cycle time, which will now be in the health quality investigations unit, and as well as in the division for all the boards, and then the adjudication portion. Those are all measured now under performance-based budgeting. We have to report those. So we have the metrics that we're supposed to be following, watching, improving upon, looking for efficiencies wherever we can. In this relationship that we have, you know, I'm committed to it. I know that just in my brief conversations with Kim, she's my partner in this. And the staff of the medical board will be our partners all the way throughout, regardless of where they reside, whether it's at a new address at DFI or at the medical board on Evergreen. We are a whole department, and that's my view. That, you know, the mission of the department, overarching, is to protect all consumers, and we do it through the regulatory boards. We do it through the constituent agencies that are so vital to the enforcement and discipline of our licensees and the regulatory mission that we have as a department. So that's a view and attitude that I do share with Kim, that, you know, our not just our working together, but our really trying to do a lot of problem solving in this process of how can we make it better for the consumers of California, and go down that road. So any more questions before I go on the transition plan? I'll go forward on, yes.
Just a general comment, which is we've been pretty much focused, because we have to and it's required reporting, on the time lapse components of metrics. And I think from our perspective, in terms of our day-to-day review of cases, it would be wonderful if we could actually, once the transition is done, is collaborate on doing a qualitative evaluation of the quality of the result, not just the timeliness of the result, and begin to look for opportunities to improve the process where, in circumstances where we end up with what we think is a less than ideal solution to a problem. It's obviously a more complicated task and would require us to do a little more work as we review cases in terms of where we think there's opportunity for improvement. But I think in the long run, from a process improvement point of view, it's an important kind of long-term result that would, I think, enhance the work in the future.
I can't agree with you more, Madam Chair. I think when you look at futures and how organizations grow and develop, it is looking at not just timelines. That's just a management tool, if you will. I think the qualitative part of it is the human asset, the human resources and developing of the work that they do and the value that they have in the work, the ethics of leadership and ethics and consumer protection and looking at the product, is it thorough, is it objective? Are we working closely with our prosecutor, attorney general, and our staff in terms of making it better?
Are we getting the right information? Are we interviewing the right people? Are we getting the right information? Do we have sufficient information in a case? And if not, is there a role for either the medical consultants, the investigators, or the expert reviewers to begin to reshape some of the inquiry mode so that when we end up with a case, we have all the relevant information that will inform the best possible judgment?
As my colleague said, absolutely, I agree. And this is where both D of I and the current Med Board staff can adapt, and seeking perfection. Maybe not getting there, but that path of seeking perfection and constantly changing and adapting. I'm sure there has been things we've learned from the medical board, their processes, relationships, et cetera. Medical consultants is one of them. I mean, I don't know what we would do without medical consultants, through this process, and vice versa. I mean, we have certain processes that I'm sure this board will benefit from. So through this process, I mean, to your point, I would love to get granular, and realizing those benefits. I appreciate that.
So on that point, at the appropriate time, what you might think what the appropriate time might be, with respect to your working group, which is such a great thing that's happening, might it be beneficial to have this kind of commissioner input, if you will, because we see it from a different perspective than staff, et cetera. So we could have that honest exchange, and once your plan is further developed, we'll say, okay, here's what we think, and you may see some benefit in it, and can it be incorporated into as the plan matures?
Yes, sir. I think that will happen largely because as we go through the components of this transition plan, we are going to further develop probably project plans to implement those topicals, if you will. So when we get there, that input, that stakeholder input, whether it's the board, the consumer group, the AG's, we have to do this not only collaboratively, but I think with a great deal of transparency, because there's a lot of expectation to make this work. And and Kim and I are maybe I'll speak for you because I know that you're kind of like me on this. We're committed to making this work.
So are we.
We are. We definitely are.
Also, and this is memorialized in my colleague's plan. We owe it to this board to report back. And it's the different milestones we hit throughout this process, discussions with staff. We're going to report back during board meetings on where we are, challenges that we faced, ways we've mitigated, how we've adapted, what we've learned, and welcome any input from this body, because it will help us become better implementers of this.
Yeah, and that actually, I have no doubt this board will be challenging you to improve the process. I mean, that's the entire goal, is to improve the process. That's what we are here for, how to get there faster and better. So that's what, so I'm sure we'll be challenging you, and I don't have any doubt that you will perform, so.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I appreciate that, because I'm looking forward to that as well. I mean, I once told somebody that look out for when you run for public office, because I ran for city council once, and I thought that would be fun. It was challenging, to say the least, because I couldn't make nobody happy. Nobody. But it was worth it. It really was worth it. So with that, are there any more questions on the organization chart itself, or I'd like to maybe just walk through the transition plan, or just briefly give you the highlights of that?
Any questions from the board?
Okay.
We'll take the public comment at the end of this item, so I'll wait.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In attachment A, in your agenda item number 4, attachment A, I think there's an item called timelines. And there you'll see a schedule of activities and events and meetings that happen throughout, through July, starting actually this month, through July of next year, and then will repeat itself in sporadic ways at the quarterly board meetings of the Medical Board of California. The major components of the transition plan is the creation of the transition team. The transition team is comprised of the Chief Deputy Director of our department, Kim Kirkmeyer, Renee Threadgill, myself, the Deputy Directors of our Communication and Public Affairs, our Ledge and Policy Review, and our administration, all the finance and fiscal and human resources, things of that nature. And the assignment of these topicals, which we haven't assigned yet, because we're going to give that ownership after our first meeting, is who gets to lead on each one of the development topics of this, and where's going to be what I call the project plan for that. So you'll see throughout October, and I did this really, really briefly, is you'll see the initial steps of the plan itself. In December, we continue the enforcement discussions, working on vertical prosecution, working with Kim and Renee, the Attorney General's office, and what is it that we have? How is it working? Looking at the metrics, looking at the vertical enforcement manual itself. In January, we start refining the implementation strategy. We then, in February, flesh out more operational detail about the implementation itself. But throughout all this, I want the members of the medical board to understand that we will be at every one of your quarterly meetings to provide you updates on what's going on. We're going to keep I mean, you teased me a little bit about I better keep my smile, or I better like the challenge, but I'm up for that. And I'm looking forward to working with this board and with Kim and Renee to make sure that this transition is not only transparent, but to the extent possible, seamless. And if we can find a better way to do and protect the consumers of California through the enforcement processes that are given to us by law, that's what we're going to try to do. And we're committed to that. So, we have the final steps, before the implementation in May, and in June, the state budget comes out, and we'll see what happens in the funding for everybody, whether it's on time or whether it's late. But the overarching issue in all of this has been that we're working collaboratively. We're trying to identify all the areas that could possibly be before us in a challenging manner that we can resolve and problem solve and implement for the betterment of this enforcement program.
Mr. Gomez, on state budget, I thought that this program is funded by the medical board, which is independent fund rather than state fund. So I'm just curious, how is that going to affect enforcement, which is pretty important for consumer protection?
It should not. The entire Department of Consumer Affairs is special fund. So such as the medical board, the RN board, respiratory care board are all special fund agencies. And yours is a little different than that your enforcement budget is coming over as kind of a neutral, budget.
Furloughs.
And I think the reason that it's on the slide is because that's when we find out if our budget is approved for the next fiscal year. So that's why in June we hope that the governor signs the budget just for the next year. So.
These are very brief milestones, but the detail is before you in attachment A.
Yeah. So I've been dancing around, and I apologize, okay? You need to understand, I apologize in advance. And I've been dancing around my angst with this whole thing. And I understand it's the law, and I understand we need to implement the law. But I also understand, because I've been around for quite a while, that there's an issue always with staffing and lack of staffing, and staffing commensurate with being able to get the job done, and budget change proposals not being approved, and not having enough staff to do stuff, and having to pay overtime to make sure that things happen. And we're stretched pretty thin now. I mean, I don't hear a complaint from the staff. I don't hear a complaint from Kim. She keeps managing, and the staff keeps managing to deliver without question, over and above what anyone could expect. And we all appreciate that. And I hope that from the DCA perspective, and from the powers of Z, whoever's watching, or X or Y, whatever the letter is this week, that the understanding is that this is a whole new law that's been foisted upon the public in the state of California, and the expectation is everything's going to happen. But the time that it takes for you to do your stuff and your stuff and your stuff is taking away from the time that you need to be doing what you are being paid to do in the first place. So I want to just, you need to understand that my angst is coming from a reality check, because I haven't heard about any offer up for additional staffing time, or additional staff, or additional people, or I'm not seeing that on any of these reports. And I just want you to be well aware of it, that I'm very concerned. Because you're gonna have burnout, and you're gonna have people angry, and you're gonna have, you can only keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and after a while, there's just no more place to push. So it's great that you guys are all working together, and you're gonna make this all happen, and I understand very well that it's the law, but I understand also that there's an awful lot of riding on this as far as everything else that needs to be done. And so it's the licensing that's gonna be, it's everything else that we do, in addition to enforcement. Enforcement is a major focus. We had made a commitment under Dr. Ganadev's leadership that we were going to make some changes, and we were going to make some major, trying to figure out what we're doing, how we can do it better. If we can, we can. If we can't, we can't. But we were already going down that track, and now all of a sudden there is this wet cloud. Mm-hmm. And no offense, I'm not mincing words. You need to understand that my angst is coming from reality. And you guys had better be prepared, Kim, you as well, that when it comes time for budget change proposals, when it comes time for new staffing needs, or it comes time for whatever needs to be done, that there needs to be a little bit, we need to not have to keep shaking that tree and hoping something's going to land.
I'm just looking at Mr. Yaslovsky. It's just like physicians and the state employees, that is, work more and get paid less. That's about it.
That's the way it is.
And
But
you're
after a while,
supposed
get tired of it.
So,
So just understand, I want you to understand, it's not about you guys personally at all. It's about the system, and if the system's going to have to work, something's going to have to be, we need some help.
Definitely appreciate the candor. And what is not mentioned is not because we are not focused on it. There are processes within the BCP process that is being worked on. That's a separate process. And I believe your executive officer can speak to the fact that we are very, very mindful of what this board needs. I would be remiss not to take a full assessment of what it will require for both of these entities, DCA and the Medical Board of California, to get to that finish line of success. So I hear you loud and clear, and I share your angst.
Thank you.
And me sharing that angst is not a doom and gloom prediction. It's just a recognition of reality.
Yeah, it's
of
a
where
reality
we are.
check. That's all I'm asking you to be aware of.
I
understand.
concede that.
Not asking for anything other than that.
Thank you.
I guess with that, if there's any more questions, I'll defer to Kim.
And I just want to let you know that we're not alone in this, and that it's, Ms. Threadgill, myself, Mr. Gomez, and Mr. Kadani, but we also have the Attorney General as a partner with us too, and I just wanted to offer this opportunity to Ms. Castro to come up and just make some comments as well. I know that she's been meeting as well and trying to get this process together for her as well. So,
thank you. Ms. Castro.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Kim. Please allow me an opportunity to speak on behalf of the Health Quality Enforcement Section to say that we're very excited about this new partnership with Department of Consumer Affairs, DFI specifically, Mr. Gomez, and all of his staff. Our relationship with DFI actually will not be new. We deal with DCA and DFI investigators already in relationship with our current other obligations to our other clients, like the Respiratory Care Board, physical therapy, and other healthcare agencies that contract for their valuable investigative services. So we will build on that long history of interactions that we already have. And we're looking forward to the joint assignment of investigations between DCA, the HQIU, and HQE. And I don't see this as much of pressing a reset button rather than just continuing on and building on successes that we have already experienced with this important program and initiative that the legislature decided was an important product to keep for public safety and for these important cases. I too take it very seriously that from a statistical standpoint, you will want to see the proof in the pudding, and we are also prepared to shave timelines where possible and continue to make it work, get it right, and to improve it if we can. And we believe, at least the Health Quality Enforcement Section, that we have been able to show you some qualitative results due to the vertical enforcement model. We have been able to produce serious discipline. We've been able to close cases earlier, brought against physicians that maybe are innocent or not as liable with respect to how they manage their practice. And that has allowed us to focus on more serious cases, to bring those to resolution quicker before OAH, and more importantly, to bring them to the attention of the public, and to identify where possible interim relief, such as interim suspension orders, Penal Code Section 23 matters, mental exams, things like that, that are identified with the help of the investigators. Now, in 2006, as we all know, the vertical enforcement model came into effect, and HQ was given authority over investigations and providing important advice, legal advice, through each step of the process. And one of the things that was identified was to avoid withdrawals and dismissals of cases and to identify other resolutions. And some of those resolutions include public letters of reprimand, citations and fines, or closure. And so in this intervening 7 years, we've gone through no less than 5 different manuals. And I think that this has built upon things that we tried and were not working, inventing of other processes to respond to public scrutiny and pressure. And I look forward to working with DCA to find where else we can cut on timelines. You know, these 5 versions of the manuals represent a lot of sweat and tears and discussions, all in the mutual interest of public protection and protecting patients, which I know that Mr. Gomez and I take very seriously, as do you and all your staff at the medical board. The vertical enforcement is institutionalized now. That did not change, and we are still your legal counsel, and we still provide you with valuable legal services by identifying cases that are meritorious. Now, throughout this process, we've always envisioned a dispute resolution process that allows the senior assistant of the Health Quality Enforcement Section, which is me right now, to be able to arbitrate disputes where the investigators and the lawyers don't necessarily agree on an outcome. I think that in the meantime, we have found common ground in these disputes, and it's usually based on passion for a just result and for public protection. And throughout this process, our lawyers rely upon tried and true experience before the Office of Administrative Hearings, and also whether or not we have legal sufficiency. And that is where the investigators are partners with the lawyers, because according to the vertical enforcement model, we direct the investigations and provide initiative to be able to get it done and get it filed, and if not, to close the case. Now, I was happy to hear that Dr. Levine thought that the chart was helpful, and I found it helpful as well. I made some comments to it, and I thought that I should share them with you so that at least at this very early juncture where we're trying to make changes.
Sure.
So that it's just very clear right now while we're talking about what we're talking about, which is the vertical enforcement process, that it's very clear where we fit into these boxes. While we do have a team approach to all these investigations, we do more than make suggestions, provide feedback, and follow-up. What we do is we direct the investigation to get it to the logical conclusion of closure, filing, or otherwise. Throughout this process, we participate in critical junctures of the cases. We evaluate expert reports, we pick experts, we approve subpoenas. And throughout the process, we do not supervise investigators, but they're our partners in getting the evidence required to permit us, your attorneys, to advise you, our client, the board, on legal matters, such as whether you should file an accusation, dismiss the complaint for lack of evidence, or take other appropriate legal action, such as a PLR or a citation and fine. And I think that it's important to note that there's always been a check and balance on how we relate to you. And one of those important checks and balances are that the Attorney General will evaluate a case to decide whether or not this investigation should be accepted for prosecution. But you, the board, bears the ultimate responsibility to decide whether it's something that you want to file. So none of those things have changed, and that check and balance would still be in play. I know that you are eager to make sure that we get it right, and I'm as willing as anybody else to be as transparent, efficient, and accountable to you, because it's the public's money we're playing with here. And it's the public, really, that we also have to be accountable to. And so we understand you want to see a return on your investment, you want to see performance-based metrics. I think we're ready to continue on that fine work. But I did want to underscore that throughout this process, the legislature has thought it important that the Attorney General's office makes the final determination of what constitutes enough of a case. And where possible, we do discuss these with the medical board staff to figure out a just outcome. And so currently the disputes are resolved through the dispute resolution process, which is all detailed in the vertical enforcement manual, of which I think the copies of it have circulated in prior board commentaries. So in any event, I'm pretty sure that we will get this right and we will do it better. And we will do everything possible in the health quality enforcement section to make sure it's a smooth transition, and we will not get in the way, and we will just continue our work. And one of our focus over the next 6-7 months, how long do we have? It's very short, is to provide input, advice, and get out of the way so we don't slow down the process. And so thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Castro. Just first one I have is that with 304, does it make it any easier or faster to get the ISO? One of the things I constantly hear is from the consumers is that we can't take the bad doctors off the system quick enough. And that is an issue, and how can we resolve that issue? So that's where you come in, so to help us.
On the interim suspension orders, we're very eager to see legislation passed that your staff at the medical board put together. And that was to try and, discuss different solutions to try and take physicians out. As one would expect, the lobbying was successful, and those changes did not go through. And specifically, we were trying to shorten the time frame for doctors who prescribe dangerous medications without indication to patients. Now, from the Attorney General's standpoint, we are very, very interested in identifying interim suspension orders, and it's a hurry up and wait approach. And so we do push on the investigators to try and get as much evidence as possible. But the truth of the matter is that the way that the statute is written has not changed, regrettably. So we still need to be prepared to fully defend a full-blown hearing after obtaining an interim suspension order with evidence. So we will work with Mr. Gomez's staff to find efficiencies and earlier identifications of those cases, such that maybe we can prioritize them early on, make co-assignments of investigators, and I'd be happy to make co-assignments of deputies as well to try and move those cases quicker. You already have everything you need. We just need to work faster on identifying those cases and throwing the resources we need. Believe me, none of us want to be left holding that body bag. None of us want anything to happen while we're trying to file this. It's a stressful thing to do, but we find it very important to move those cases. So we take it very seriously.
Thank you. It's prevention more than anything else, I think. Ms. Karshmeyer.
Yeah, SB 304 actually did extend the length of time for us to file an accusation, which I think is what you're talking about, Dr. Gonadev. The current time to file an accusation after interim suspension order is issued is 15 days, and that was lengthened to 30 days. So that will be an assistance to the investigation of the case, in that they have a little bit longer in order to gather more information to file an accusation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they're talking about for improving the ISO process.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board to Ms. Castro? All right, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Gomez and Kim, you got any?
I think we're finished.
Okay, any other questions from the board to Ms. Karshmeyer or Mr. Gomez, Mr. Kedane? Public comment, I got one slip. Karen Eldred.
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife, vice chair of the Midwifery Advisory Council. In the spirit of wanting to get this shift right and improve it, I want to try to capitalize on the suggestion of the team approach by making sure that people consider, when there are cases against other than doctors, other than the MDs, that a representative of the profession be included in all levels of the deliberations about whether a case should be brought against a practitioner. I believe that my impression has been that this has not necessarily been true in the panels and the medical consultants. Again, my impression that the medical consultants have been asked to weigh in on professions that they don't necessarily have training or experience in. And I would like to see that as a part of the team, as a change in this process as it unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, we truly appreciate Mr. Kedane and Mr. Gomez for coming and giving us a report. And we'll move to the next item. Next item is the presentation regarding the enforcement program accomplishments. Ms. Sweet.
Good afternoon. Well, there's no denying that this has been a tumultuous year for the enforcement program on many, many fronts. And actually, the past 5 years have been exceedingly challenging, which I will explain a little bit more about shortly. It's been a little bit disheartening because we've heard the word broken bandied about as it relates to the enforcement program. And this adjective seems to have cropped up regularly after a widely read newspaper series criticized our seeming lack of omniscience. Our investigative staff has worked tirelessly to uphold our mission of public protection. We take our mission very seriously, and you can imagine our frustration. That is not to say there is room for improvement. We're always striving for opportunities to improve, but I feel like the investigators have borne the brunt of all of the dialogue that has taken place the past year. So I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the accomplishments of the enforcement program.
Before you go further, I can tell you, Ms. Sweet, that this board does appreciate your hard work, so we want you to know.
I appreciate that, but I want to let you know what our staff has done. A lot of this information is extracted from our Sunset Legislative Report, but I think what happened is it was such a voluminous 400-page plus document that much of this got buried. So I'm going to take everyone through it, and I apologize because you can't really see those numbers very well. Between fiscal year 06 and 07 and 12-13, which is also encompasses when vertical enforcement came into play, we have seen a 351% increase in criminal referrals, a 100% increase in license restrictions and suspensions, which Dr. Gananadev is responsive to your question to Ms. Castro about. We have made tremendous improvement in that regard. There's certainly opportunity to do better, but I think that's an impressive statistic. We've seen a 70% increase in license revocations, a 39% increase in completed investigations, a 36% increase in cases as referred to the Attorney General, a 26% increase in probation violations referred to the Attorney General's office, a 26% increase in overall disciplinary action, a 23% increase in cases resulting in probation, and a 15% decrease in the average time it takes to complete an investigation. And of course that is with collaboration with our colleagues at the Office of the Attorney General, but the investigative staff have worked extraordinarily hard. Also, I just wanted to point out that these statistics will be different from what is in the Sunset Report in case you compare them, because I've included the last fiscal year numbers. But what doesn't get discussed, or I don't think was adequately conveyed, is the challenges and obstacles investigators face these past 5 years. So we were furloughed starting in 2008 and 2009, and at one point furloughed 3 days per month. And when you look at the working hours lost per investigator, these are staggering numbers. Our colleagues at the Attorney General's office were not furloughed during this time. However, we were. Then in fiscal year 2010 and 11, we were prohibited from hiring without going through a very arduous process. So we had a hiring freeze in effect for 2 full fiscal years, which adversely impacted our ability, obviously, to get staff to replace staff who had left or who had gone to other agencies where they were not being furloughed. As you can see, our vacancy rate increased to 17% at one point, but we've been working very hard to get that down to where we are currently, which is 2%. And as you can see, our time at investigation has gone down from an average of 349 back in 08-09 to 268, which I think is laudable. So for each individual investigator, there was a loss of 656 working hours. We had the hiring freeze. We lost a lot of vehicles, so there was a lot of staff time spent trying to justify vehicles and then dealing with having to redirect vehicles. We had travel restrictions. We had a new process requiring contracts for all of our, at one point, 1,100 experts, which involves tracking to make certain that they don't exceed a certain amount, and then we have to require another contract. So this is very time-consuming for staff. Ongoing challenges that have been faced. Subpoena enforcement still presents a big challenge for us. It adds an average of 154 days to a case through no fault of the investigator. Physician interviews add an average of 50 days to a case. The collaboration and review of the vertical enforcement process can add up to 75 days per case. And the one of the unique...
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
These are the places where we need to see how we can make an improvement. So can the staff tell us as you go through what can we do to to these three problems you cited, 150 days, 50 days, and 75 days. I think this is where I think the issue comes up, where we hear from the media that it takes forever to get there.
Right, right. No, I think these would be great opportunities to have parties involved from all interested facets who can impact this to address these issues. So, one thing that's unique about medical board investigations is we do service cases from the cradle to the grave. Our sister agencies do not, they hand off the case at the point the expert review is undertaken. So that is unique to us. And this is a burdensome, sometimes very frustrating process to match the correct expert to the correct case, to train the expert, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we have done the past 5-6 years to increase our efficiency. We've talked about this, the H Case Council, where initially we lasered in on any case that was over 700 days old. We composed a team of the chief, deputy chief, the area commander, supervisor, the investigator, all the people involved in the case to try to troubleshoot ways in which to move the case along. I'm happy to report that we're now down to 550 days as the demarcation line for the H Case Council. So we have very few cases that are in that horrible state of agedness. The VE manual was revised with dual collaboration with the AG's office. The model disciplinary guidelines were revised. We entered into a transcribing contract for medical reports and interviews because this was a very time-consuming process of the investigation to have to summarize an interview. The best evidence is the transcript, so now we actually get the transcripts and our experts can call in and our medical consultants can call into this service rather than have to type out a report and utilize it. We've implemented strict timelines for investigators to obtain releases, records, conduct interviews, prepare cases for expert review. We provide detailed statistics to each supervisor to track case aging and production every month, a variety of statistics, case aging, production, the oldest cases in the office, and we try to generate competition among the offices to facilitate movement. And we've made some internal process changes by eliminating redundancies. For example, we used to have medical consultants prepare memoranda and the investigator prepare a summary of the same thing, of the interview. Now we have the transcript, so that saves time in that regard. We have fully implemented our field training officer program. We have provided 13 weeks of post-certified, instruction to our new investigators, which is above and beyond the 16-week academy that they attend if they don't have peace officer status already.
What is post?
The Police Officer Standards and Training, Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. We've done 97 background investigations for sworn staff and hired 62 people. We sent all of our investigators, all of our staff to time management training. We, as I mentioned, have achieved the 2% vacancy rate, which is the lowest in 5 years. And we also provided,
How many of those 62 stayed with us rather than go to another agency?
Oh, that Ms. Threadgill has that information because we've recently compiled that.
Okay.
And then we provided 1 week of post-certified training for our supervisors. So post-certified training would be equivalent to your CME type of training. It's required a certain amount, obviously not as difficult as yours. Other milestones achieved, we provided, now it's an 8-hour course, but it's 10 hours of CME accredited expert training program for our experts. We reinstituted Operation Safe Medicine. We hosted training for investigators and received assistance from the AG's office on providing a segment relating to medical record acquisition techniques and strategies, including subpoena enforcement. We sought and were successful in getting legislation to require physicians to provide certified records, legislation calling for physician cooperation in scheduling interviews, which has been improved. And we have undertaken, this is something I don't think gets disseminated, but we've done at least 50 outreach efforts in the past 6 years to various hospitals, medical staff, consumers, and other law enforcement agencies. So we try to make ourselves available to educate the public. Currently in progress, we have our strike force, Operation Rex. We are planning statewide training specifically for our investigators for January for overprescribing cases. And we have our third comprehensive 8-hour expert review training session is going to happen at the beginning of next month. I'd like to conclude by saying I couldn't be more impressed by the work ethic, the ingenuity, the passion, and dedication that our investigators, supervisors, area commanders have shown the past 6 years. Their professionalism and tenacity demonstrate, despite one obstacle after another, that they have a tremendous level of character. And Chief Threadgill and I just want to take this opportunity to commend and thank our staff for their extraordinary efforts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Before you leave, what changes in the SB 304 will improve our enforcement process? Like timelines for interviews, timelines for how many times the respondents' attorneys can postpone that type of, so can you explain to us?
Well, I think as Ms. Castro mentioned, and she showed you the manuals, there are opportunities when there's a whole new set of eyes looking at something to review some of these things. And I do think there are opportunities to tighten up some things in the manuals that we share with the Office of the Attorney General. I think just any time you have fresh eyes on something, it's an opportunity to look and maybe look at systems that, you know, there's an opportunity to improve. Some of the things I don't see being resolved by where physically we are, some of the challenges that we face, the subpoenas, the record acquisition, some of our biggest challenges relating to time, I think are going to continue to exist just by nature of the work.
So I want to thank you very much for the report, because I think what it goes to show is that for all the bad stuff that we've been doing, it's really not as bad as we thought it might have been. So I don't know, you know, it's always very nice to pontificate on what we don't know for sure, but here we have some facts in front of us, and I would hope that your staff or our staff would figure out a way to start telling the story, because we are doing a whole lot better than I think a lot of us realized. And you can't sit there and constantly do it, but somehow there's got to be some kind of directed expectation that the public needs to know that in fact that we are paying attention, that we are doing a better job, and the results are in the details. So I encourage you to figure out a way to get the story out there.
I agree. I think we are not conveying that information to the media and the public. Yeah. I think it's the public and then the media which gets on us. And that's why it is important to convey that information too, rather than we don't speak to media or something like that. So, any other questions from the board? Dr. Yip.
Is the expert training still on November 2nd?
Yes, it is, and I hope, well, I'll do a report about that, which, well, I don't know if it's bad protocol to tell you because it's very short. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
It's November 2nd. Please, if you can attend, I invite anybody who can attend. It's going to be at UC San Diego at their Met building, which is architecturally gorgeous from what I understand. So we are a go, starting at 9 o'clock on Saturday, November 2nd until 5:30.
Is it 8-hour CME credit course?
It's going to be 10 CME credits, because we have the experts actually do a sample expert opinion, which takes a couple of hours. We give them a lot of clues during the training, so it doesn't take too long, but then we grade the opinion and give feedback. So we think that is helping generate a better product.
Is it only offered to the existing expert consultant, or who are the target audience?
Primarily, our experts are the preferred target audience, although anybody who wishes to attend may attend, as long as we have space. It's interactive, so the experts are all assigned a clicker so that they can participate and vote on scenarios and things like that. We only have 125. Plus, if it gets any larger than that, I think the productivity of the group diminishes, so.
Is there any way of using any kind of telecommunication protocols that you could run a similar kind of a program in another location simultaneously with another team, but not in place?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
It's something maybe
something we could look into.
For future, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I see this is a separate agenda
Yes,
item too.
yes.
So I want to make sure we're tracking our public comment on the first part of the presentation and, you know, go down the line. sorry, I didn't.
No worries.
It started bleeding in more and more, and I just want to make sure we're staying on track.
That's why she's sitting on this side of me.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Sweet? If not, public comment? I have no slips, so it's free, you can come up. None? Okay, with that, we'll go to the item number 6, which is discussion on suggested improvement to the enforcement program and review of the member survey results. It's me. We took this on and I sent this out to the committee, and I did get some responses. But we thought in this enforcement committee meeting, because we had an item which was unexpected came on, which is 304. So we thought we spend a lot more time on that and see where we're going first before we go and see how can we make improvements. So that's why my suggestion is to defer that item to the future board meeting till we see where we're going with how we're going to streamline the SB 304 process and the enforcement. I think that's our priority for this committee, priority for this board. So that's what my suggestion is. Unless any board member has any objections, we'll go to the next item. Thank you. What's next? Item number 7, update on Operation RX. Prescribing Task Force, Ms. Sweet.
Okay. Our prescribing strike force has been working extremely hard on overprescribing investigations exclusively. Since the last board meeting, 4 physicians and 1 physician assistant have been arrested or have self-surrendered with criminal charges pending. A total of 3 search warrants have been executed, one of which resulted in the seizure of 250 boxes of evidence. And to illustrate kind of what the work in a search warrant involves, the case investigator actually started the day at 5 a.m. for briefing and went until 3 a.m. the next morning working on that particular case, because the search warrant involved 2 counties, and they also did a final undercover operation as part of the tactical event. Since its inception, Operation Rex has conducted 15 undercover operations and has procured about 2,000 physical prescriptions. Numerous search warrants are in the planning stages. They've also concluded 3 investigations where it was determined the physician was practicing within the standard of care. Currently, the unit has 27 cases in its caseload. A unique aspect that we are learning about relating to these cases is the need to coordinate with so many other interested law enforcement agencies. So Operation Rex staff have met with the Drug Enforcement Agency and are working cases with them, the Department of Justice, the Office of the Inspector General, and the FBI, as well as numerous law enforcement agencies in each town where they go, because they're traversing the state. And then they're also working with a variety of prosecuting agencies and are going to be also working with the United States Attorney's Office. So they've been remarkably productive. As we've talked about at previous meetings, overprescribing cases are fraught with challenges because of the sheer volume of material that's necessary for a successful prosecution. But our dedicated investigators have risen to the challenge, and I want to commend their efforts to date, and we'll have more to report at the next board meeting. Any?
Thank you, Mr.
I hear all the different parties that you're going to be collaborating with, and I'm wondering about the opportunity for other health professionals, providers, physical therapists, nursing board, pharmacists, all of them, that have you ever considered having some kind of a meeting with them to figure out if there should be, let's say, a directed phone line, a directed anonymous tip place for professionals, for not just the public, but I'm just hearing about, and I'm just telling everyone that I talked to that they should automatically just file a complaint with the medical board. But it seems to me that they're feeling that they need some more hand-holding or directed service opportunities. So it's something that you might want to think about.
Absolutely.
Collaboration with other health care providers.
Ms. Sweet, you gave some numbers, what the task force did. How do they compare to before, comparative period?
Zero. That's a hard question to answer because they're such time-intensive investigations. And what at some point we will be able to do is look at when, because they took cases that had been already, were being worked in the field. So some of those cases were at varying stages of aging. Once we get to a point where the task force is taking clean, brand-new cases, which they are, we're starting to send them brand-new cases, we'll be able to compare the time it takes for them to resolve their cases, having a lower caseload than to investigators who have, a regular caseload in addition to the prescribing cases. So, but at this point, it's too new to give any, decent data.
If you can give us in the future how the timelines are.
Okay.
How long is it taking to really, as we go forward?
Okay.
So that would really to help us to see if we're getting more efficient. That's all I'm looking for, more efficiency. Thank you. Any other questions from the board members? If not, public comment? Any public members commenting? Okay, that will take us to the next item. Ms. Sweet, you're on the hot seat again.
Okay, just to
update on export reviewer training. What update you can give more?
Okay, well, November 2nd is the big day. If you can be there, please check it out. I think you'll find it interesting, and we're giving CME credits, and we hope it's as successful as the previous trainings have been. We have a great lineup of speakers.
Yeah, I encourage board members to go. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in Philadelphia at AAMC meeting, so I couldn't make it. So that's why I think it's good to have one or two board members. I truly appreciate if anybody can go. Thank you. Any public comment on this item?
Do we have an animal in the room? Yes. Okay, I saw something fly before, so I didn't know what was going on.
It's like headquarters.
Public comment.
And it's one under the table by you.
Is that what it is? I mean, I saw something going somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
God, they don't
Okay,
bite.
next item is
Where's
item.
that law enforcement guy? Tell him to get over. Are you guys, don't you have guns or something? Weapons? I mean, my God.
Well, this item was not on the agenda, so we can't go there. Anyway, item number 9, probation monitoring presentation, Ms. Katie. I saw that.
See?
Something fly down there, went right under the
It's a
table.
historic hotel for a reason.
Oh my God.
Should I wait? Should I-
Put the camera on it. Put the camera on it.
Thank you.
It's so dark,
It is so difficult for me to.
For the first 2 minutes of nervousness is a long time.
Good evening, almost. Now we'll focus on a little bit another aspect of the enforcement program. I was asked to provide the committee with some background information on the probation monitoring unit and how this program monitors the physician's compliance with the terms and conditions ordered by the board in its disciplinary orders. By way of background, there are 561 physicians currently on probation. Of that number, approximately 444 are in practice. 117 are in a category that we would call pended or told, which means either they're out of state or they're in California, but they're not practicing. We still monitor those individuals, but the contact with those physicians is less frequent and usually is done by phone or in writing. The probation unit is staffed with 15 inspectors who are located throughout the state in the board's district offices. Each inspector has a caseload of between 25 and 35 physicians to monitor. When a physician is placed on probation, the inspector meets with the physician prior to the effective date of the decision to conduct an intake interview. During this interview, the inspector goes over the decision with the physician and explains each one of the conditions. If the physician is required to maintain a log, like a controlled substance log or a chaperone log, The forms are provided and explained to the physician.
Ms. Katie, are these inspectors, probation officers, based in our offices in the Southern California, I mean, all over the state, or?
All over the state, yes.
And when they meet with the physicians go to their office, our offices?
They do it either way. Sometimes they will meet with the physician in our district office. Sometimes they'll meet with them in their office. So they'll make arrangements with the doctor in terms of what's convenient.
Thank you.
At the end of the intake, the inspector will also go over any of the timeframes that the physician must meet, like when do they need to enroll in courses, when do they need to identify practice monitors. So all those are explained during the interview. The inspectors also meet with the physicians, as I mentioned, with each physician in their caseload every single quarter to review their progress and get an update on how they're doing on probation. They usually discuss issues like, is the physician working? Have they completed the required courses? If they haven't, what's the status? Have they enrolled? Trying to get a sense of where they're at in complying with the terms. We also usually discuss with them whether we're receiving reports, if they're required to be in therapy, if they're required to have a practice monitor. Those individuals provide reports to the probation unit, but we hold that physician responsible for making sure the reports are received. So we usually will let them know if there's any problem in receiving the reports. We also want to find out from them whether they're having any difficulty meeting any of the ordered conditions. So after the interview is complete, the inspector prepares a quarterly report that summarizes how the physician is doing, what the status is of their compliance with all the terms and conditions. And if there are problems identified or if the physician is not in compliance, they'll usually send a letter to the doctor sort of to reiterate what was of concern, what timeframes need to be met so that they can be in compliance with their probation. Whoops, wrong direction. I thought I'd focus today on some of the common conditions that are ordered for physicians on probation. Almost 50% of the actions that are taken by the board charge the physician with gross negligence and incompetence. The disciplinary guidelines will require that, or will recommend that probation be given with various educational courses and typically a PACE assessment. For the benefit of some of the newer members, a PACE assessment, PACE consists of a 2-day assessment, which includes computer-based testing, which covers medical knowledge pertaining to the physician's practice specialty. The physician is given an oral clinical exam while they're there, and there's usually an assessment of the physician's general health during that 2-day assessment. PACE staff will then review the results of the 2-day assessment and develop a 5-day, 40-hour program of clinical evaluation and education, and they use medical staff or medical faculty from UCSD to provide those services. After the full assessment is complete, PACE then prepares a detailed report with their findings and any recommendations they may have for the physician to remediate deficiencies that are identified through the assessment process. One of the things that we've noticed in the last couple of years is an increase in the recommendations for a neuropsychological evaluation from PACE. With an increase in the number of aging physicians being referred to PACE, the screening tests that they perform are starting to identify some cognitive deficiencies that could impact a physician's fitness for practice. So typically they'll request that additional evaluation. After those evaluations are performed, if no deficiencies or no problems are identified, the physician continues on with the assessment process. But sometimes those evaluations uncover a problem that shows that the physician may not be fit to practice, and sometimes the physicians will opt to surrender their license at that point in the process. As you can see, the majority of the physicians that are referred to PACE successfully complete the assessment. In the last 2 years, only about 17 physicians have been referred for additional administrative action for noncompliance with the requirement to complete PACE assessment. The primary reasons that the referrals to the AG's office are made are either the physician doesn't enroll in PACE, or he enrolls and doesn't complete the full program within the time frame specified, or they discover an underlying medical condition that affects fitness for practice. And so all those are rolled in, yeah.
Ms. Jaslowski.
So I have found that our using of PACE has been a very good asset, that it really has given us the extra safety net to ensure that the person is either capable or competent or not to practice. My concern is that with a person that decides not to complete or not to pass or not to enroll,
Yes.
how much time is given to that person? How often is it checked? I mean, how long is a doctor allowed to continue to practice before we catch him or her?
That's part of what the inspector does as a part of their regular monitoring. So typically, the decisions require that within 60 days from the effective date of the decision, the physician has to enroll in PACE. So usually at that next interview, the inspector is asking what the status is. If the doctor hasn't enrolled, then that's a compliance issue that they would identify. What we see the doctor is also required to complete the PACE program within 6 months from when they've enrolled.
Right, these are all new, by the way, for those that are new members. Those are pretty new requirements, which are great.
Right, the timeframes help us keep track and make sure that this doesn't stretch out too long. There may be some legitimate reasons why the assessment can't be completed within that time frame. Sometimes there are issues with the physician, either his scheduling, general health. There may be some issues that where we would not jump in at the 6-month point and start pursuing noncompliance. But
so let me ask you a question. So we can assume that those doctors that have been required to be involved with PACE somehow, that within a quarter or within 6 months, they have, in fact, either they are in the program, or they are completing the program, or they are going to be disciplined for not being there?
Correct.
Okay.
One of the new tools that we've got that's been very successful too is we've added in the disciplinary guidelines the ability to issue cease practice orders for a variety of conditions. PACE is one of them. So non-compliance, we could issue a cease practice order. The benefit of those orders, and I don't know that it's been an issue thus far, but the benefit of those is the physician quickly comes into compliance.
It's also condition precedent we've done.
We've done that too.
Which is
yeah,
also.
It just depends on how the board has decided it's best to implement that.
On the 17 people who failed or did not comply, do we have what specialty they are? One of the complaints I used to get before I got on the medical board is the PACE program is more or less for internists and family medicine docs rather than a urologist or a dermatologist who rarely does that stuff. So do we have any numbers on that?
We could certainly pull that, but one of the benefits, or one of the things that we haven't really run into that problem with a practice specialty, but because they're using their medical faculty, they typically will have a number of physicians to be able to address the various unique specialties. But that could be one of the reasons why a physician may not be able to complete within that 6-month period, because PACE is trying to pull various faculty members together to provide that assessment. Okay, let's see. If there's no more questions about PACE, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Substance abuse is another category that results in physician discipline. When a physician is found to have a substance abuse issue, the disciplinary guidelines will typically recommend that the physician undergo a medical or psychiatric evaluation, receive ongoing therapy, and there's usually a requirement to abstain from use from drugs or alcohol or both. Random biological fluid testing is always ordered to ensure compliance with the abstain from use conditions. The board has a contract with First Lab to provide testing for physicians on probation. The physicians will set up an account with First Lab, and they're provided with a listing of testing facilities and locations within the geographic area that they're in. So then the physician is required to call in, either call in every day or log into First Lab website to determine whether they are being required to report for testing on that particular day. If ordered to test, the physician's required to report to the lab that same day. Failing to submit to testing on the date ordered can be identified as a missed test, and that could be considered a violation of probation. Each of our inspectors has the ability to log into the First Lab website and, as part of their regular monitoring, look at the physician's record of contacts with First Lab, along with any of the results from their tests.
Ms. Katie,
Yes.
Ms. Jaslowski.
So before you go on that, I don't know the company that you're speaking about. I don't need to know the company you're speaking about. I just need to know that this is the only method of having testing done, and that it is available throughout the state on equals, because I'm understanding maybe not. That's why I'm asking the question. So my question is this: have we ever considered, in addition to that, having alternative sites set up, like within a hospital? I mean, or within a alternative practice, to make sure that we don't have any lapses?
One of the
Or
things,
not only lapses, but I'm sorry, but the idea that a doctor should not have to drive 2 hours because they live in a remote
Absolutely.
area and be penalized because they don't.
that has been arranged. There have been some unique circumstances where there is not a lab that's conveniently
Right.
located to the physician. That's the exception. That rarely
absolutely.
happens. But
You're
yeah,
right.
we set up some sort of alternate arrangement. I think we've had one physician who was able to do the testing in their hospital setting.
So we're being flexible. We're not-
Absolutely,
okay.
absolutely. Let's see. One of the other thing that I wanted to tell you about how we monitor the biological fluid testing is we have an analyst in our probation unit whose sole responsibility is to review the results of all positive tests to monitor for compliance with the abstain from use requirement. Before it can be determined whether a positive test is evidence of a violation of probation, the analyst first has to take a look at the specific decision for that physician to identify whether the positive result corresponds to a substance that is restricted or banned in the decision. The next thing that the analyst has to do is rule out whether the physician has a legitimate or valid prescription for the substance that is showing up as positive in their test. And then finally, the physician is interviewed and asked to provide a response or an explanation for the positive test. Once all that relevant information is gathered, the analyst also consults with the medical review officer at First Lab. And then we'll come up with a recommendation for the probation unit manager as to whether a violation has been identified. If a violation has been confirmed, the board can issue a cease practice order, which will remain in effect for 15 days. The cease practice orders are signed by the Chief of Enforcement. At that point, an accusation must be filed within 15 days or the cease practice order will expire. So given the short time frames that are involved with these, the probation unit also consults with and has a DAG look at all of the information that has been obtained thus far, so that we're sure, if we're going to proceed with the cease practice order, that we've gathered all the relevant evidence that will sustain a filing. Any questions?
So,
yeah.
what's the next step once we put in a cease practice order? What can the respondent do, or what happens next?
What happens next is we issue the cease practice order, it's transmitted to the AG's office, an accusation is filed, and that's where the physician's due process rights come into play. So he or she will have a hearing. And we'll charge him with a violation of probation, basically.
If they sign an agreement, a stipulation that they will abstain from alcohol or drugs, whatever it is, and they're found to have been positive, okay, so we're only talking about that group of people,
Sure.
which is probably very small. Do they lose their due process rights if they would sign with a stipulation if they are found to be in violation of their terms and conditions of the stipulation, that they would surrender to an immediate cease practice?
The stipulation is in essence the same as a decision. So in the language in the stipulation, it usually has that cease practice order.
It's written in there? Okay, I
Yeah, it's
didn't know.
usually in there. Yeah, we pull
Okay.
the same language in stipulated agreements.
Okay, thanks, I wasn't aware.
Dr. Levine.
Yeah, but that does not prevent a physician from challenging.
Right.
Oh, absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
and that's where the quotes
Right.
due process rights comes in.
Exactly. I thought I'd give you some information about the number of physicians that are being tested at this point. In the last fiscal year, we had 120 physicians who had that biological fluid testing requirement. About 30 of them are out-of-state physicians and therefore are not required to test in California. Our data showed a total of 55 positive tests that were considered actionable, meaning the physician had no prescription for the banned substance or the test was positive for ETG, ETS, which signifies alcohol consumption. The number of positive tests does not necessarily mean that 55 individuals tested positive for drugs or alcohol. Instead, the same physician could have tested positive on multiple occasions, and then in the petition to revoke probation, it would reflect the number of circumstances or the number of positive tests. So that doesn't necessarily represent a total number of individuals.
So 55 could represent 23 physicians.
Could, yes, yes.
Does it?
I can check that for you. You know, some of the reasons that we would pursue a petition to revoke could be non-compliance with that the doctor is called to test over and over again and doesn't report. They don't always translate into that being specific positive tests.
Can one, in some egregious circumstances, can an ISO come into play there?
Certainly, and that would be a decision that would be made by the DAG reviewing the case, whether this is an ISO case. Let's see. Finally, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some statistics on the number of physicians who have completed probation in the past 2 fiscal years, either successfully or unsuccessfully. 160 physicians have successfully completed their term of probation or petitioned the board for early termination of probation. Now I thought we could talk about some of the unsuccessful completion, so to speak. If a physician fails to practice for 2 years while on probation, the board proceeds with an automatic cancellation of the license. You would typically see that automatic cancellation come in out-of-state discipline cases where the physician, we're taking action based on action taken in another state. The physician is licensed in another state and resides in another state. And although he or she has a California license, we've disciplined it the same as the other state, but they have no intention of coming to California. So those automatic cancellations is what we would consider an unsuccessful completion. One of the more common concerns we hear from physicians on probation is that it becomes difficult to be accepted as a provider in some insurance plans while on probation, and the costs associated with probation are high, especially during the first year of probation. Some physicians opt to surrender their license if maintaining a practice becomes too difficult. Notwithstanding some of these difficulties, there are a number of physicians who fail to rehabilitate during their probationary term and are referred back to the Attorney General's office for subsequent discipline. As we all know, the goal set in statute is to rehabilitate and remediate physicians while ensuring adequate protection for the public. The conditions identified in the disciplinary order are designed to meet this goal, and the role of the probation unit is to give the physician the tools and the information necessary to meet the conditions that have been ordered. The inspectors are also charged with monitoring the physician's practice to ensure that the patient protection components are being adhered to as well. Not all physicians and situations are always appropriate for probation monitoring. We see a number of physicians whose behavior does not change after the training and the coursework, but when subsequent disciplinary action results in just additional probation time and a repeat of the same terms and conditions, we don't always see a successful conclusion. We've had some physicians placed on probation who are diagnosed with psychiatric conditions that are not being well managed with medication. And those are really problematic for the probation inspectors to manage. We can't necessarily ensure that the physician is going to continue on their prescribed medication. And sometimes those, when the physician chooses not to take their medication, they end up back in a subsequent discipline. So what I tried to do was give you sort of a general overview of probation monitoring. If the committee has any specific areas of interest, I would be happy to address those in future meetings.
Thank you. And I have one fairly simple, I think, question is that because once you're on probation, many hospitals don't give you privileges.
Yes.
Many insurance companies don't put you on, and often the government programs like Medicare and Medicaid don't contract with you. So if you are a physician, he or she made a simple mistake, that is, went to a bar at 6 p.m., had a couple drinks, and somehow or other stopped by a policeman, and the court puts you on probation, but with us, we got to follow the standard. So what do we do with those people? Never had a problem, we have great recommendations, good doctor, it was a simple little mistake in the evening on a Saturday night.
You're just lucky they didn't kill someone on the way home.
I agree. I'm just trying to see how do we really work on their probation terms, or what do they get, how do they can get a job and really rehabilitate themselves. I have no doubt on I agree with you, Ms. Slawski, but I'm just trying to see how can we help these people.
A single DUI is not necessarily a violation. Okay. And we may not take action on a single DUI unless there are some special circumstances associated with it, like an excessively high blood alcohol level, which gives us an indication that there's a problem. We would have the doctor examined, evaluated by an addictionologist, and determine whether or not it's something that we need to have him disciplined for or put something in place to protect the public and him.
But Dr. Ganadev, in all due seriousness, I apologize for being flip, it's the hour of flipness. It seems to me that we do have a responsibility of making sure that we educate our physician population to the ramifications of what happens if you get into trouble. I mean, that's what our newsletter is supposed to do. They're supposed to educate physicians on all sorts of things, and maybe we need to do a better job to make sure that they need to realize that that a license is really serious, and you've got to take it serious, and the protection of the public above all else, they've got to realize that if they're going to do the crime, they're going to pay the time, however, the thing goes. We've got to do a better job.
I was just trying to see a special scenario, what would, I think you answered my question. And
yeah. 2 DUIs is another story.
Right.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, in my hospital, I have 170 residents. These are young people. Mm-hmm. So as I just left as a medical director only a few months ago. For 13 years, I did that job. So one of the important things I learned to tell them once I came on medical board is protect your license. Exactly. Don't make dumb mistakes. You spent enough time in your life to get this far. So I'm just trying to see how we can, that unfortunate one who made a simple mistake and hasn't hurt anyone. Right. That's why, that's important to also. Right. Any questions to Ms. Cady? and board members? Yes, Dr.
Yeah, I
Levine.
just want to emphasize the point you made. I think residency program directors who do not make certain that physicians understand that it isn't just what they do when they're in the office seeing patients, but that their behavior outside the exam room and outside the hospital can have an impact on their license. And even if patients aren't involved, and from reading cases, we know that physicians are often challenge or sometimes challenge the discipline because no patients were harmed.
Right.
And it is really a failure of the program directors to not ensure that physicians understand that license is a property right, but it's not one they have a lifetime entitlement to.
Any other questions? If not, public comment? Thank you, Ms. Katie. Okay, we're coming to the close. No bar after, no, don't go to the bar and drive afterwards. So the last item on the agenda is agenda items for February 2014 meeting. So in addition to update on the expert reviewer training, an update on the prescribing strike force, and an update regarding the implementation plans for the transition of staff pursuant to the SB 304, are there any additional items to be considered from the board? Okay, if none, any public comment? Thank you, and there is being no other business, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Good job.
I just want to see if anybody's opposed.
Did a
Thank you.
Great job, Deb, great job.
Thank you. Thanks for putting up with me on my first meeting.